We're going to do an audible. This is the NFL football season. For the Americans, they know what I mean. For our foreign guests, what this means is that we're waiting for the foreign minister, Sami Shukri, to join us from Egypt, and he's on his way. But we're going to do a little bit of an audible. I'm Myron Brilliant. I'm the Executive Vice President of the U.S. Chamber in charge of international affairs. You have many of the Chamber leadership here. Marty Durbin, who's our Senior Vice President for Policy, and frankly, knows much more about energy and climate policy than I do, and he's going to play a big role here. And then you have some of the regional heads of our international program. I know Kush Choksi, the Senior Vice President for the Middle East, and Scott Eisner, the head of our Senior Vice President for Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to have many of you here today. It's a busy time for us all with the UN meetings. The U.S. Chamber has had a number of meetings with heads of state all week long, and I hope that some of you have had a chance to participate. For those of you from foreign governments, we are delighted to have so many ministers participating in today's program, and we're really delighted to also have the contribution of the U.S. government. You're going to hear in a few minutes from Ambassador David Thorne, a good friend of the business community, someone whose team under John Kerry, the Special Envoy for Energy Policy and Climate, is really looking at how we build public-private partnerships. And that's going to be a theme of today, how the United States business community, working with our own government and working with governments around the world, find solutions to some of the climate challenges that we face collectively as a global community. I want to acknowledge that that this is an event that doesn't have a regional context. This has a global context. And all of us recognize we've got to make progress on climate change. We have seen so many consequences in the last few years, but I can certainly speak to record-breaking temperatures in the United States and China and other places. Yesterday, I was at a forum on Democracy Delivers, and the aid administrator, Samantha Powers, was talking about some of the flooding that's taking place in key countries around the world, some covered by this community of ministers, but certainly we've seen it also in Europe and elsewhere, in Pakistan, and obviously we're all impacted, and certainly the populations in these countries are impacted. So at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we are really delighted that we have strong support from the business community to work with all of you who are coming from foreign governments. And again, to thank the team from the U.S. government, Ambassador David Thorne, and others who are here who are focusing on this on a daily basis. We're going to look today at efforts to work on sustainability, on climate mitigation priorities. We are at the Chamber very focused on how we can show up at COP27, how we can make a contribution. Delighted that Marty and Kush and others will be there. Suzanne Clark, hopefully from the U.S. Chamber's leadership, the President and CEO of the U.S. Chamber. And most importantly, how we're building towards COP27 so that COP27 is successful and we continue to make progress as a global community. We will see today leaders with diverse expertise and perspectives. We're going to talk about financing. Of course, you can't get anywhere without financing. We're going to talk about decarbonization and innovation and the nexus between public policies and spurring innovation. And we're really going to hear, hopefully, about plans that companies and governments have to ensure success as a collective community. Today, the UN Assembly will hear from the President of the United States, President Biden. Certainly, this will be a central theme of the President. I think almost every meeting we've had this week, climate has been one of the top 2 or 3 issues discussed, and that's not a surprise to any of us. There are differences in approaches that have to be overcome. There are certainly a need for a recognition that that climate change is not just an obvious risk that we have to work on, but requires close international cooperation. At a time of great geopolitical uncertainty, here I'm not just talking about inflation and food security and the theater of war in Europe. I'm talking about also challenges that we see between the United States and China. We have to find a way to make sure that we stand together and united in our approaches to address climate challenges. We're doing our share at home, the U.S. Chamber, through the leadership of Suzanne Clark, the President and CEO of the Chamber, Marty Durbin, Neil Bradley, and others. We're looking at how we seize tremendous opportunities to contribute to carbon transition in all markets through innovation, financial resources, and commitment that we're making to economic growth. And again, COP27 is an important milestone on the road to ensuring we as a community are working together. I would ask that all of you who are invested in this effort make sure that we hear from you after this forum, that we continue the conversation, and that we make sure we're making a contribution. As the foreign minister of Egypt enters the room, I want to just say a transition now to the U.S.-Egypt relationship and my introduction of my good friend, Sameh Shoukry, the foreign minister of Egypt, but also a man who now has the responsibilities under President Sisi to have the responsibilities for the climate agenda and COP27 this year. The U.S. Chamber is the home of the U.S.-Egypt Business Council, and we have for many years been working on how to build out the ties between the two countries, and we feel that one of the areas that we can make a contribution is clearly helping Egypt in its hosting of the COP27. This is, as Shoukry knows better than anyone, the 100th anniversary of U.S.-Egypt diplomatic relations, and it's an incredibly important milestone and opportunity to think about not only the history of the relationship, but point to the successes going forward. I've known the foreign minister for a very long time. I know that Foreign Minister Shoukry always gets annoyed with me when I refer to him in his formal name. So, Sameh, it's good to finally see you here this morning. I know that you were battling with traffic, but I want to just make sure before I turn it over to you and Marty Durbin that I give you a big welcome on behalf of the participants here today. I appreciate always your leadership, your vision, your support, and your recognition of the critical role that the United States plays. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn to His Excellency Sameh Shoukry to talk about the COP27, his thoughts about where we're heading, and to lead that fireside discussion, let me invite Marty Durbin, the Senior Vice President for Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Please give a round of applause for both of them. And Sameh, it's great to see you. I know it's a busy week, so thank you for being with us here today. And with that, come up to the stage, everyone.
Both of us. Thank you, Myron.
Hi, Myron. Good to see you. How are you doing? Go ahead. Left or right? Or
Oh,
right
that's
to
fine.
left?
Either works. Well, good morning, Your Excellency. Thank you again for joining us. And let me just echo Myron's comments about the commitment you've made not only to ensuring a successful COP27, but for the long-standing and constructive relationship that the U.S. Chamber has had with you over the years. But jumping right in, getting to COP27 and the goals and the vision that have been set out by President Sisi and yourself, the President has said that COP27 provides an opportunity to showcase unity against an existential threat that we can only overcome through concerted action and effective implementation. So I know implementation is going to be a recurring theme, has been all year long as you've been discussing what we want to accomplish at COP27. But you as well have talked about the need for stated that we need to turn the Glasgow outcomes into action. And we all know what an enormous undertaking it is to pull off one of these annual conferences and how important it is. So to start with, just wanted to ask, how's it going?
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and happy to see the faces of so many friends and colleagues. American Chamber has always been a resource that we've taken full advantage of, and we hope to continue this tradition on the basis of mutual benefit, but more importantly, on the basis of friendship and cooperation. And again, to reiterate what Myron said, we do highly appreciate the cooperation and the coordination that exists between Egypt and the United States, and we depend on United States leadership as far as climate change is concerned, and appreciate the commitment that the U.S. has shown in supporting the meeting the challenges against climate change, and which has been most recently demonstrated by the legislation that has been passed. And we hope that that commitment will continue to resonate in President Biden's attendance of the high-level segment in the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, and also in finding the landing points and the points of convergence, and showing the flexibility that will guarantee a successful COP. As you mentioned, we have been highlighting the importance of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh as being the COP of implementation. Paris and Glasgow were finalizing the roadmaps and the legal aspects related to the Paris Agreement, and now it's time to implement what has been agreed in the past. We have to recognize that those agreements are well and fine, although they, of course, might need additional expansion, and recognizing the depth and the, as you mentioned, existential nature of this challenge. We must rise to the occasion and show ambition. We've been advocating and encouraging countries to enhance their NDCs, and through that showing their commitment and a higher degree of ambition in taking measures that will deal with both mitigation and adaptation, and have us reach a zero carbon world as soon as possible, if we are to maintain the 1.5 degree goal, or if we are to maintain this planet for future generations. I think it's quite apparent, as the science has always indicated, and as I think every observer, that climate change is a fact of life, a devastating fact of life, with the loss of life of scores of Pakistanis, and the current flooding, and the loss of life in the cyclones that have hit South Africa, in the extreme heat waves that we've seen in Europe and the United States, and the consequent forest fires that occurred. So real people are really suffering, and nobody can discount that as a fact. In addition, of course, to the constant scientific data and information related to this challenge. So again, implementation. And when we do address implementation, I think we have to address also a very important aspect, which is trust. And if we don't create in Sharm el-Sheikh the necessary trust between the developing and the developed world, we're going to lose this battle. This trust has to be manifested in implementing previous promises and commitments, and to recognize truly where we are. When in Copenhagen we agreed to the $100 billion, and I think we are all cognizant of the fact that the $100 billion is a symbolic amount. It's an arbitrary amount. It nowhere comes near to dealing with the true gigantic challenge of mitigation, not to mention adaptation. We need trillions to be able to actually have an impact. But let us say when that, until today, the commitments made on the $100 billion have not been fulfilled, then I think it is right for many in the developing worlds to stand up and ask why. And when the $100 billion has not been committed, then I think a lot in the developing world will be reluctant to take measures themselves, especially since they have not contributed to this problem. And currently, for example, Africa, I think, emissions constitute 0.6% of global emissions. So, and of course, we have to contend with the current conditions in Africa countries trying to bring their people out of poverty and trying to do so by utilizing whatever resources at their disposal. To put additional burdens or even burdens on them at this time when there is a lack of implementation and commitment on the part of the developed nations is somewhat disconcerting. Again, the finance gap is one that I think we all have to recognize again and find a way to meet. And then there's the huge gap in the finance available to adaptation. And here, when we speak about adaptation, this is really an existential issue that impacts many in the developing world, with the rising sea levels and the potential for small island states to disappear off of the planet. And then I think the conversation has to be a serious one related to loss and damage. For all of these reasons, again, I come back to the issue of confidence and trust. Sharm el-Sheikh needs to show our ability to at least incrementally provide the resources to fill those finance gaps, to recognize that if there aren't concessional finance available to many in the developing world, they will be unable to take the necessary measures to contribute to the fight against global change. Again, this fight and this obligation, it can really not be only met by governments, but certainly all stakeholders have to be included. And this is another aspect where we have paid a lot of attention. It is a matter for not only governments, but certainly civil society, which is vocal and I think an important segment of this process, but also the private sector. And here I think the American Chamber can be an important contributor, and I value that for Egypt at least, the Green Mission that was headed by Ambassador David Thorne recently, I think, is a demonstration of a commitment to deal with issues of climate change, to create synergies and cooperation between the private sector of the United States and in Egypt in support of green projects and the transfer of green technologies. So this is, again, a fundamental area. As my good friend, Secretary Kerry, always tries to reassure me, if we haven't met the 100 billion goal in terms of governments, but there are trillions available. And I always tell him, well, show me the beef. Those trillions have to be dispersed. And how does the private sector engage, especially in the developing world in Africa, without the support of governments in providing the securities, providing the guarantees that can encourage the private sector to make the commitment and to engage in what is viewed as a high-risk area, and thereby here is the cooperation between public and private sector to be able to engage fully and show the commitment to moving the fight against climate change forward. So that's been a long-winded response to your question. And I am sorry, we're going to probably have to expedite a little bit because the schedule has been totally shot by the freezes on New York City. But I suppose we have to contend with the difficulties of UNGA and New York City.
Well, the good news, Minister, you raised a lot of the critical issues that we're going to be addressing in the program later here. But I wanted to ask you, you focused, and Egypt is focused on the need to accelerate climate action by reducing emissions, scaling up adaptation, enhancing the movement of finance as well. But we also know that so getting to where other countries are at this point, since we all left Glasgow, there's been some awfully big events on the world stage that have been affecting the energy, food, and economic security around the globe. So just ask, are you seeing, or what are you seeing as far as countries' continued focus and commitment to addressing the climate challenge and reducing emissions, while also having to manage these other challenges that have arisen since?
Absolutely, there's been an impact of the geopolitical situation on the UNFCCC process, and whether it's the issues of polarization and the potential of an inability to deal effectively and to manage the issues in cooperation rather than an adversary. In addition to the fact that there has been, what we have sensed is that there are those who have taken advantage of the current situation to backtrack on their commitments and to utilize this as a pretext for doing so. And these are all, unfortunately, issues that might impact. We've seen the unfortunate results of the last G20 environment ministers meeting in Bali and their inability to reach a consensus, whether because of the geopolitical tensions or because of utilizing those tensions as a pretext for backtracking and trying to squirm out of previous commitments. So we are cognizant of the dangers that exist, but to try to highlight that this is not, we hope that these tensions are, let us say, temporary in nature, as other, and will be resolved one way or another through interventions and through the wisdom of those who are hopefully in a position to intercede. We will call upon all participants, all parties in COP to rise to the occasion, and again recognizing the existential nature. If we don't have a world to live in, then these crises are really very inconsequential. So we have to deal with what is really a long-term and existential challenge, and try to isolate what might be temporary situations of rising geopolitical tensions, but deal with the commonality of the challenge that we face, and that nobody's going to come out of this a winner if we don't maintain the momentum, and the consequences, I think, will be irreversible.
I think momentum is very important. So I'm cognizant of your time, and so we'll wrap things up here. You addressed in your comments, and I know you've focused on the need for governments, the private sector, and civil society to work together. And just know that U.S. Chamber of Commerce, our partners at the American Chamber of Commerce in Egypt, we will be there in Sharm. We're committed to helping you make this a success. The last question I'll ask you, again, knowing you've got to get moving along here. I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room that's never been to Sharm. So what is it I should be looking out for? Something I should experience while I'm there, or the things we shouldn't miss?
Don't forget your bathing suit.
Okay.
No, I had the privilege of being in Sharm last Thursday to see the venue. I was impressed with the preparations. The Secretariat of the UNFCCC was there. They are impressed with the venue and its preparations. We will have, I hope, a good turnout in terms of the high-level segment. We have about 70 confirmations of heads of state and government, and we anticipate during this month we will receive more. But there's going to be an opportunity, both for the presidential roundtables that we are holding. Each will be concentrating on a specific item and deliberations between heads of state, and their actual physical presence in itself will create a momentum, will give the right signals to the negotiators to address the issues from a perspective of flexibility and accommodation, as well as we have planned thematic days that will address many of the issues, among them decarbonization and various other pertinent issues of the time, food security, water scarcity, hydrogen and its future uses, and other issues. But then there are going to be subsequently thematic days addressing all of the issues that are of concern, and there will be an opportunity for the private sector again to participate fully, and civil society and showcase. Again, here, the corporate responsibility in new technologies, in renewable energy sector, and in how the private sector can finance and extract benefit from the drive towards a carbon-free world.
Excellent. Well, we're working closely with you and your fellow ministers on those theme days, so count us in as partners there. And just again, want to thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us here today, and look forward to seeing you in Sharm el-Sheikh. Please join me in thanking the minister. Okay, to keep things moving along here, what I'd like to do now is invite Ambassador David Thorne. Myron mentioned him earlier, but David Thorne is the senior advisor to the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. He also served earlier as ambassadors to both Italy and San Marino, and as a senior advisor to Secretary of State Kerry when he was there. More importantly, he is currently a great partner with us and the rest of his team as we've been preparing for COP27. So I'd welcome David Thorne.
Thank you. Should I take my name? Let's let Minister Shukri leave in peace. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and I'd really like to thank the Chamber for inviting me to share a few thoughts this morning on the critical role of the private sector in tackling the climate crisis. And I couldn't resist, the comment that was made in the beginning by Myron about calling an audible. I was a soccer player, and there are no audibles in soccer. You start and you go. So anyway, I couldn't resist the thinking about that's what we're trying to do now and catch up. It's really a pleasure to join leaders from across the African continent to discuss both the challenges and the opportunities presented by climate change. And we are not united not only in recognizing the great urgency of addressing this crisis, but in the understanding that climate solutions represent a truly historic opportunity to put our economies on sustainable pathways to the future. And I'd like to reassure Minister Shukri that we are working hard to make Egypt's COP a success. And we felt very much that COP26 in Glasgow was a great success, and we have to keep up the momentum. To that end, Secretary Kerry is just back from Africa, where he met with the presidents of Nigeria and Senegal, as well as African economic ministers at their conference in Dakar. Every single minister he spoke with expressed their eagerness to address the climate crisis and highlighted the urgent need for our help in coping with the devastating effects of climate impacts. As you all know, President Biden has made addressing climate crisis one of his top priorities. He joined the Paris Agreement on day one of his administration and set an ambitious NDC target for the United States. As I lose my voice. He worked with Congress to enact a bipartisan $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. And just a few weeks ago, he signed the Inflation Reduction Act. The IRA is the single largest investment in climate and clean energy solutions in U.S. history. We are grateful to those business organizations and to the many other stakeholders who helped get this bill across the line. And we are counting on working with the entire business community as we now turn to implementing it. There's no question that our success in tackling the climate crisis requires full and sustained engagement by the private sector. That's why Secretary Kerry has made working with the business community really a top priority. He and I have met with business leaders from all across the world to galvanize action and strengthen private investment in the green transition. And wherever we go to lobby for increased NDCs, it's always accompanied by a meeting with the climate sector, with the private sector, to focus how they have to help have their countries meet those goals. In May, I led a U.S. government delegation, as Sami Shukri alluded, to Egypt to participate in the Green Tech Business Delegation. I'd like to applaud the U.S. Chamber and Commerce, and especially AmCham Egypt, for their leadership in organizing this trade mission, which exceeded expectations on every front, And frankly, AmCham Egypt, one of the most important American chambers across the world, always does an exceptional job in pulling things together. And I think that's going to be true of Sharm. The delegation included over 40 US companies, including major brand names that are mainstays of the Egyptian economy, and newer firms building their entire business models around climate solutions. We learned a great deal about Egypt's ambitious goals, its new pro-investment policies, and specific projects that are ripe for investment. Our team continues to work with our Egyptian counterparts, US businesses, and colleagues across the administration to see how we can accelerate investment in areas such as methane abatement, renewable energy, electric transport, and food and water security. Governments play a vital role in mobilizing the private sector. Public finance can help catalyze private investment in clean and climate resilient technologies, and nowhere is that more important than at this COP in Sharm. And the government of Egypt is developing a new model to do just that through its country platform for the nexus of water, food, and energy, which they're calling NUEFE. Egypt has identified priority sectors for investment and is working with partners to develop the bankable projects. I was just in Egypt at a NUEFE organized conference. It was very impressive. They've really got a very interesting model that I'll allude to that we hope is going to be able to be carried to other places. NUEFE has the potential to attract billions from donor governments, philanthropy, and the private sector. And it can serve as a model for what can happen across the African continent and around the world. And we very much hope that that what we finally resolve with NUEFE in Egypt will actually serve as a model for JETPs and other elements of our work. Beyond our efforts in Egypt, we are partnering with the private sector on global initiatives to drive in innovation, advance critical technologies, and build markets to net zero solutions. One of the biggest initiatives I've been working on is called the First Movers Coalition, which was launched by President Biden and the World Economic Forum at COP27 in Glasgow. FMC is designed to send clear demand signals to accelerate commercial deployment of innovative technologies. We need to decarbonize the world's most hard-to-abate sectors. More than 55 of the world's biggest companies have already made purchasing commitments totaling more than $10 billion, creating the largest market for advanced clean technologies in history. We started by focusing on 4 sectors: steel, aviation, trucking, and shipping. At Davos this spring, FMC expanded its scope to carbon dioxide removal and aluminum. And at COP27, FMC will further expand into the cement sector, which accounts for around 8% of global CO2 emissions. Another initiative we launched at Glasgow is to pool and leverage companies' market power is the Clean Energy Demand Initiative called SETI. Through SETI, we are connecting companies with ambitious clean energy goals with governments around the world to help advance the policies needed to unlock those clean energy investments. In fact, when Secretary Kerry was in Abuja last week, he and Minister Abdullahi, I think I pronounced that right, signed a letter of intent with 7 companies outlining steps to help accelerate Nigeria's clean energy transition. To address emissions from the shipping sector, we and Norway will launch the Green Shipping Challenge at COP27. Together, we are encouraging governments, ports, shipping companies, cargo owners, and others to commit concrete steps that will help put the international shipping sector on a credible pathway this decade toward full decarbonization by 2050. And finally, in addition to our efforts to rapidly reduce emissions, we must also strengthen climate resilience. Climate impacts disrupt lives, livelihoods, supply chains, and markets, and increase competition for resources. Fortunately, well-planned adaptation strategies can reduce these risks while also creating new economic opportunities. At COP26, President Biden announced his emergency plan for adaptation and resilience, which we call PREPARE, which aims to help more than 500 million people in developing countries adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change by 2030. In Africa, with the world's fastest growing populations and economies, adaptation is lives saved, it's jobs created, and it's also common sense. Roads, bridges, ports can only spur and sustain economic growth if they're built for a warming world. The private sector can play a key role in mobilizing the necessary technologies and finance. However, a recent World Bank study found that only 1.6% of all adaptation finance comes from the private sector. At COP27, we'll be launching a new initiative to scale up private sector action and investment for adaptation. I look forward to sharing more details of that soon. As you can see, there's a lot going on. There's still very much more to do if we are going to succeed in tackling the climate crisis and get ready for Sharm. COP27 is less than 6 weeks away. We know that innovation can take time, but we're also running out of time in this decisive decade for climate action. We need to move quickly, and we encourage all of us to set ambitious goals for what we will all be able to showcase in Sharm, and we're counting on the private sector to help us do it. Thank you. Am I sitting there? Okay. Please. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Thorne. I'm Scott Eisner, the president of the Chamber's U.S. Africa Business Center, and it's a pleasure to host this next panel. We're joined by, obviously, Ambassador Thorne. We have Dr. Muhyiddin sitting to the left from the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for Egypt. We have Dr. Baba, who is Chief Executive of Environmental Health Council of Nigeria, and Dr. Amin Adam, Deputy Energy Minister for Ghana. We're going to jump right into this conversation. As we know, we're a little bit short on time today and in crunch, so I want to get right into it. We just heard from Ambassador Thorne about what success looks like from a U.S. perspective, but I want to ask each of you, what does success look like for your nations as you look towards this COP and what you want to see coming out of it? So I'll start with my left. Dr. Baba?
Thank you very much. Let me start by first and foremost sending the deep apology of my honorable minister who was not able to come because of serious engagement. He is representing our president in another bilateral meeting. And it is indeed a pleasure to also have the minister been invited to have this interface in this critical time. The issue of climate change is reality, and when you look at Nigeria, it's very strategic because we are the most populous Black African nation. So addressing the climate challenge in Nigeria means addressing the 50% of African climate crisis in Africa. Well, Nigeria as a nation wants to really appreciate and thank the United Nations States of America, because we believe the United States has to give the necessary leadership for other countries to really emulate. We as a nation, Nigeria, I believe we have put in place all the necessary mechanism, from the institutional framework to the legal framework to also going ahead to create the enabling environment for the private sector to participate. Because we believe the climate crisis and climate challenges are local issues, and they need to be looked into from the local perspective, not the rhetoric that we have been hearing from the tall, ambitious Paris Agreement. For us in Africa, is it a reality? This is a question that we need to ask ourselves. And it is our belief, with our collective response and also collective commitments, we are going to make it possible. One of the critical issues the Minister of Environment has said I should mention is on the issue of how volatile or how vulnerable Nigeria is in terms of climate crisis. because when you look at the north, there is a lot of desert encroachments. And when you look at the coastal area from Lagos to Warri, you see a lot of flooding occurring. This is also creating a lot of not only the climate crisis, also security challenges in the nation, because the arable land is no more accessible to the farmers to really do agriculture. And that's also relates to what we call the food system crisis in Nigeria. So it is all in cross-cutting issue when we discuss about the issue of climate change. But what can we do, or what we have done in Nigeria for the sake of the information of our distinguished colleagues here, is the President Commander-in-Chief has passed and signed into law the Climate Change Commission. And this Climate Change Commission is supposed to be an agency that will coordinate the issue of climate policy, climate guidelines, and also provide the institutional framework, and also spelled out the responsibility of the federal, the responsibility of the state, and also the responsibility of the local government. And also is one of the legal instruments, because we believe policy alone cannot really make people to achieve the issue of climate crisis resolvement. It requires a lot of enforcement at the grassroots in Africa. I know in the developed countries, you don't have such problem, but we know in Africa, you need to really have a legal instrument that will enforce some of the legislations in terms of climate adaptation, climate resilience. More importantly, I believe where we really need also the support of the United States of America is to develop local capacity on the issue of renewable energy. I'm happy to announce that the Nigerian government has just issued the issue of this green bond, which is also making the enabling environment for private sector to participate actively, because government alone cannot achieve the issue of resolving of climate crisis. So it requires a lot of participation of the private sector. And I believe also the enabling environment is there. But what is more critical to Nigeria is the issue of decarbonization and the zero carbon that we are preaching, which is a very tall ambition. The question I want to ask, is Africa ready to go for zero carbon? The answer is no, because with our economy and our level of growth, and also with the challenges we have, more importantly, we have seen a lot of commitment from the developed countries. Till tomorrow or till today, we haven't seen any commitment, because there is no any single fund that has been assessed to address the issue of climate crisis in Africa. So for us to really start thinking of decarbonization or zero carbon, we need to see something on the table. And seeing something on the table needs a forum like this, so that we move from the theory discussions to come to the practical applications. We were in Senegal, and I believe Africa is going to COP27 as a group, and they are going in bulk with a single statement. And I believe also on behalf of the entire Africa, Nigeria wants to really support and also go in tandem with whatever that is achievable, or whatever possible to be achievable to address the issue of this climate change.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Similar question to you, Dr. Adam. From your perspective, what does success look like coming out of this, and what are some of the needs that Ghana has going into and coming out of COP27?
Well, thank you. I mean, as rightly said by earlier speakers, the issues are diverse and different from one country to another. They are even different between continents. And I believe that is why the Paris Agreement provided for equity and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and the respective capabilities of nations. And so our capabilities are not the same. The two main problems that are affecting Africa is our ability to adapt. Climate adaptation is a major challenge because even though we are not emitting so much, the brunt of emissions is felt by Africa and our people. I've seen data suggesting that 35 out of the 50 most vulnerable countries in the world are in Africa. And the IPCC also indicates that the rate of human-induced temperature rise will affect Africa more than anywhere else in the world. Yet we don't have the resources for adaptability. We don't have the resources to build the resilient infrastructure that will support our response to climate effects. In Ghana, some of the problems we are faced with are floods coming from climate change, washing away our roads that have been built with scarce resources, washing away critical infrastructure, electric poles and transformers, telephone masts are being washed away. We also have droughts, which are drying up water bodies used for hydroelectric power generation. And then we also have sea level rises that are devastating coastal communities in Africa. These are some of the challenges that we need to be able to address. Yet we don't have the resources to build the resilient infrastructure to cope with the effects of this. The other issue has to do with energy access and security. So while the developed world is concerned about accelerated transition, we are concerned about ensuring that we have equitable access to electricity. Electricity, in our view, is a right. It's not a privilege because it can empower communities. It can bring accelerated development to communities when they have access to electricity. The whole of Africa is faced with this challenge. About 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa do not have access to electricity. And the statistics also further reveal that Africa's 1.2 billion population is expected to double by 2050. About 500 million more people by 2030, which means that demand for electricity is going to increase. Yet we don't have the resources to build the energy infrastructure that will meet the demands and the energy needs of our people. We need the private sector to partner with us to build generation capacity, to build a transmission network, and then also the distribution network. Ghana is somehow lucky within the West Africa area because as far as access is concerned, we have about 87% access in Ghana. But countries around us, including Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Benin, Mali, they have low access. Ghana has been supplying electricity to our neighboring countries. And therefore, if the private sector considers investing in Ghana to increase the generation capacity and also build sub-regional transmission lines, we can be able to export power to those countries around us through the West Africa power pool. And this is how regional cooperation can help in addressing the access challenges in West Africa in general. Let me also add that as far as power is concerned, gas is so critical to us. The largest source of energy in Africa and in Ghana also is biomass. But gas is far better than biomass because biomass is destroying our forest cover. You know, biomass is affecting the health of our people because they have to go burning charcoal, they have to go picking firewood, and their health is so exposed. And this is worsening the conditions of life of the people. And this is why we think that gas should be explored as a bridging fuel, as a transition fuel, because it's far better than what we have in most of Africa. Gas is better than coal. South Africa is using much of coal to generate power. We think that gas will be a better, cleaner alternative. Gas is also important because it will provide a base load for renewable energy. Because if you don't have a base load, because of the intermittency associated with renewable energy, you are not going to have reliable, uninterrupted supply of power. And so we think that looking at gas as a bridging fuel is so important. But we are worried about the policies of developed countries. Funding for oil and gas projects is declining, and in spite of the fact that it is so critical to our economies. About half of Africa's 55 countries have proven gas reserves, and they rely so much on revenues from oil and gas. 50% of export revenues in Africa are all coming from oil and gas revenues. And so if funding is drying up for these projects, what happens to our ability to provide energy to our people? And what happens to the revenue that we need so much to transform our economies? But your policies are not favoring us at all. I know that the European Union is introducing the what they call the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And I know that the United States is following a similar policy through the Clean Competition Act. This is going to affect Africa so much because it's going to close international markets to African commodities. And gas is so critical among the commodities that are saving the survival of African countries. And so it is important for your government to look at Africa when they are formulating policies in order for us to collaborate with each other and to cooperate globally to addressing the climate risk that is afflicting the people of Africa in particular.
Thank you very much. Powerful words, and couldn't agree more on the inclusive nature of the conversations. We've heard a little bit from the Egyptians and the U.S., so I want to come back as we close out. I got a sign from the back of the room that we're shrinking a little bit on the panel. So I want to take up this thing of what does success look like, but also spend a number of conversations over the last couple of days around food insecurity, not just related to Ukraine, but when it comes to fertilizer, and clearly gas and other things are a feedstock for successful agricultural economy. So picking up on a circular economy theme, Dr. Modine, how do you view the inputs that are needed to have a healthy and successful society? And then feel free to give us some rounding out comments as we begin to close out this panel today.
Right. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the Chamber for its leadership. This is not the first time we meet. Thank you so much for convening me and my team many times in Washington, being supportive of many of the initiatives, especially behind the scenes where it matters to push the agenda of the private sector and the participation between the public and the private sector. Well, I think the success of the COP should be basically in trying to respond to legitimate, ambitious expectations from all of the participants on the COP, including actually what we just heard from the African voices today through the Honorable Minister and Deputy Minister, and of course from Ambassador Thorne earlier, from a perspective of partnership, from a leading economy with leading investment community. But I think we need really to solve some of the puzzles. And what Ambassador Thorne mentioned about common sense, I'm afraid it could be cliche, but common sense is not that common everywhere. And I'd like to solve the mysterious 3% that the world is suffering from, starting from Africa, given the emphasis. The emissions from Africa, 3% of total emissions, based on latest updates. But the suffering of the African communities and economies much more than that and beyond the contribution. The warning is that the 3% will not remain 3% forever. As mentioned by the honorable government officials from Ghana and Nigeria, and I would say from Egypt as well, there are ambitions to urbanize, to industrialize, and for the middle class to have better access to facilities. The 3% in Africa came at a cost of high poverty rates, lack of access to energy. Of the 800 million who lack access to electricity, 600 million happen to be Africans. That cannot really remain, and we still talk about climate justice and fairness. So I think that issue of the 3% need to be dealt with adequately before it's too late. And it's basically up to the partnerships between the public sectors and the private sector, not one of them, around the world, including the participation of civil society to solve the problem Otherwise, we'll be seeing industrialization and development that's not clean enough, not green enough, and we'll be spending forever to fix problems. So I think still with opportunities in finance, investment, technology, enhancing our data systems, because these new areas of work on mitigation and race to zero are basically data heavy. And there is no better than the partnerships with the US leading businesses in this area. And we have seen a great deal of success, including from the race to zero with 10,000 participants in the race. Many of them are from the United States. The other 3% that is mysterious, and I'm happy that Ambassador Thorne put an emphasis on resilience and adaptation. This is very much lagging behind. Even from development finance institutions like the regional development banks or the World Bank, typically you get 80% finance for mitigation and 20% finance for adaptation. I'm afraid we don't need that. I will not even ask for parity. I think the majority should be going to adaptation of finance from public sources, because the private sector had identified the business case. So what we need from the public finance institutions is to leverage, is to de-risk, is to provide the kind of environment that the private sector can do a better job investing in solar energy, renewables, green hydrogen, and the likes. The adaptation front or resilience front need more attention from public finance, because based on a latest report from the Center for Adaptation, Global Center for Adaptation in Holland, they say only 3% of total finance is coming from the private sector. Out of $11.4 billion that went to Africa, only 3%. I can take it as a former Minister of Investment. I would say, well, 3% is too little, but it gives me hope. So where exactly the private sector have identified close to $400 million of business in Africa that we can partner with, scale up, and do better through the partnership there. The other thing, and this is something that it needs your knowledge, partnerships as well, not just the money, because there is a kind of a fallacy that if you are doing better in mitigation anywhere in the world, you are going to be reducing the emissions everywhere. But if you are investing more in adaptation, it's going to be localized. This is a mistake, because if the adaptation is not taking place, this will have serious implications in societies, in communities, in putting tensions on many of the aspects of the work that will be forcing migration, more refugees, more tensions around the world. And there are good opportunities as well for investments in resilience, not just by the insurance sector, but other partners. The final point on the 3% is basically between the emission, the 3%, and the 3% that is contribution to adaptation. It's the famous 100 billion. Even if the $100 billion is fulfilled, this is less than 3% of total finance required for climate action. So two things here. Every country, including the representatives of countries in this room, because of the 23 countries of the OECD that should really provide 100% of the 100 billion, only 6 or 7 are doing their homework and mobilizing their taxpayers' money for that purpose. That needs to change, because while it is still small, but it's very much important for the work of development financial institutions and for where it matters with higher risk than normal, than the private sector cannot really do without this kind of funding, where the two COPs, 26 and 27, commissioned a team led by Nick Stern and Vera Songwe to tell us something about the road forward towards mobilization of finance from all sources, public, private, domestic, and external. So I'm seeing progress in this front, but the final part here is basically about how can we do a better job on the investment front. There is a great deal of attention to new technologies, including innovation and finance. Building carbon credit markets for Africa based on African needs is something that Egypt is working with countries like Gabon and others. There is a work as well, and I'm happy that the Secretary General of the UN mentioned that yesterday, that the heavy reliance on debt, more than 60% of finance of climate coming from debt instruments, that needs to change. And he mentioned yesterday, in good way of being practical, debt reduction mechanisms, including swaps for investments in climate and in nature. And this will open the door really for the leading minds and investment banks in the room and beyond to deal with that. Practically, we had two quick solutions. Regional roundtables have been formed, and this is the first time ever to be done in preparation of COP, any COP. And now, and this is the response to GFANZ, we have examples from the 5 areas of operation of the UN system, from Latin America to Asia, to Africa, and to the Arab countries and Middle East, more than 70 projects as examples, ready for finance, and this can really be a start of a pipeline of projects worth billions. Egypt and localization of investments has started as well, a big project, perhaps inspired by your very successful mission to Egypt on digital, smart and green. 6,000 applicants, and we're picking the winners by the end of next month, and they will be showcased in Egypt. So many good opportunities, but it will not really happen without decent partnership between the public and the private sector, not one of them alone.
Excellent. Thanks so much. You picked up on the exact theme of this panel. I'm going to turn to Ambassador Thorne and then come back towards me for last remarks. Ambassador?
Yeah, am I on? Okay. Like I can't agree more with Mahmoud about the importance of finance, and it is really the most in many ways, the most challenging aspect of what we're trying to do, because we've heard about there's not enough finance for adaptation, and we've been focusing on it a lot because this is the African COP. How much you want to call it that or not, I don't know, but we certainly want to find solutions for that, and that's why Biden we've initiated this effort called Prepare. But GFANZ talks about trillions of dollars and everything else, but we've got to find the mechanisms to apply commercial finance to these problems, and that's been challenging. And it's really, as you said, it is the cooperation between the financial institutions and the development finance organizations. DFC is going to be on the next panel, can talk about that. And we've been working with them and all the other agencies, trade and USAID and others, to find meaningful finance, concessionary finance, in order to free up, the 10 or 20x of commercial finance, and it's hard to the private organization have got to bend and take more risk. We've got to de-risk as much of the project as possible, and the countries have to identify these projects. And NUEFE is an example of this. Is a Herculean effort being made by Minister Al-Mashat, I think, to organize this. And we're hoping it will be a model to be used for JETP countries all around the world as an example of the efforts of the government to organize projects that we will then find a solution. And I actually talked, I'll put it out there, with Nigel Topping, who was your counterpart or your predecessor, about actually organizing young bankers around the world, to banking institutions, to lend their best and brightest for a year or so to help countries structure these kinds of deals. Because we can do that, it requires experience and ability to do this that a lot of countries don't have. I think very few do, to the order of magnitude we have to do it. And I thought Nigel's idea was quite good, is to have a cadre from the best banking institutions of the world, whether it's Citibank or HSBC, B of A, whatever.
Standard Chartered as well, given that they are in the room.
Well, okay. To let, what did you say?
Standard Chartered.
Standard Chartered.
Given that they have been with us.
Don't mean that I could give you the list, but to find, to get the cadre of young volunteers, or not so volunteers, to work on this problem for a year or two with the countries in question, whether it's Africa or Asia. Same problems exist all over the place, worse probably in Africa. And we got to unlock this money. The money's there, but we haven't unlocked it yet, and it's the first thing, top order of business. Thanks.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you very much for that intervention. Your Excellency, last remarks as we close out the panel.
Well, we've spoken about the failure to meet the commitments by the developed world to support climate resilience and also adaptation and mitigation. But apart from that, I know that there is also a problem with investment capital flow into Africa, particularly in the renewable energy sector. It's not been as we expected. Over the last decade, about $2.2 trillion of investment in the renewable energy space, only $55 billion went to Africa. You know, even though it's increased from a decade before of about $5 billion to 55 billion, the 55 billion is still not significant. That is about 2% of the global investment. And so there is need for us to look at the financing so that we can be able to push this required investment, because the potential for renewable is also there in Africa. I think about 7 of the 10 sunniest countries in the world are in Africa. So the potential is huge. Except that when you are investing in renewable energy, you also need other supporting infrastructure. And this is why I'm inviting the private sector to look towards building the transmission network, the transmission infrastructure, so that we can evacuate the solar, utility solar, and then wind energy that we are investing in. This is so important, because if you have the utility skills and you can't evacuate because you don't have the transmission infrastructure, then that will be problematic. Ghana has implemented a number of policy reforms to reduce market risk and to attract capital from the private sector. For example, we have obligatory purchase provisions by law, so that once you build and then you generate, government will have to buy. You know, and so we have that obligatory purchase responsibility on us to assure you that there is security of market for those who invest in renewable energy. We have import tax exemptions. We're also now doing competitive procurement of renewable energy. And so the potential is there, and we only can hope on partnership with you and your support to build the economy that we all want to support the accelerated development of our people.
Thanks very much. It looks like I have a call to action to lead a green tech mission to West Africa, perhaps after this event. So I'll work with our Steve Lutzen team. Last word as we close out the panel. I know we've been kept you here a little too long.
Thank you very much. A lot has been said, but Nigeria as a nation, we need to really have the promissory notes of the developed world to give us the opportunity to address the deficit infrastructures that we have in Africa. We need to equally look at COP27 as a COP of action. Also, we really required to have accessibility to finance for climate adaptation, which I believe is the key. And the financing also should bear in mind the local people, the farmers at the community level, because these people are at the receiving end. Whatever policy, whatever program we are initiating at the global level, we must look into and consider the local farmers, the local communities, because that's where things are happening. Also, we need to have the roadmap of this climate financing, because without the roadmap, we don't know when to start and when to finish, and at what level can we evaluate the progress made. And lastly, on behalf of my honorable minister, I want to use this opportunity to sincerely thank and appreciate the United Nations envoy, John Kerry for visiting Nigeria. I believe there is a lot of promissory notes given to Nigeria, and Nigeria is optimistic that something positive is coming out this time around. And on this note, I want to thank and appreciate the United Nations Chambers of Commerce for creating this good enabling platform for us to have this interface and to have this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. How about a round for our panelists? And in the world of audibles, I'll be handing over to Steve Lutz, our Vice President for our Middle East practice, for our next panel. Steve?
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Scott, for the handoff. I've got the football, to use another term in football language, we're going to call an audible. We're going to do a little adjustment on the schedule. And I'm really excited to welcome to the stage our next fireside chat on investing into a sustainable future with His Excellency Minister Khalid Al-Faleh, Minister of Investment from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And he'll be in conversation with Jim Andrew, Chief Sustainability Officer and Executive Vice President from Pepsico. Special thanks to Pepsico for their support of today's event, as well as their leadership as co-chair of our U.S.-Saudi business program. One housekeeping note I want to mention is we're going to move through and just everybody self-manage. If you want coffee, we're going to condense our coffee break so that we can try to catch up on our program. But with that, if I can invite Jim and His Excellency Minister Al-Faleh to the stage, and they will engage in this fireside chat. And we very much look forward to the conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Steve.
Great, thanks, Steve, and good morning to everyone. It's a real honor to be here with His Excellency Minister Al-Faleh and the U.S. Chamber to talk about investing in a more sustainable future. And I'm also honored personally to be here representing the 300,000 associates of PepsiCo globally. Most of you probably know some of our iconic brands, and we were talking about them in the green room ahead of time. You know, Lay's and Pepsi and Gatorade and Quaker and Doritos, but you may not know really who PepsiCo is. PepsiCo is one of the world's leading food and beverage companies. About 55% of our revenue actually comes from food. And we have an agricultural footprint that's about 7 million acres or 2.8 million hectares globally. We source 25 major crops from 30 major countries. And this size means that a sustainable future and a sustainable world is absolutely central to our business. And so that's why it's such a pleasure to be here today to talk about investing in that sustainable future, to hear your thoughts on promoting sustainability and how it's not only the right thing to do, but a good thing for business and a good investment. So again, Your Excellency, thank you. And let me start with the first question, which is, as you look back over your career, and this is my mic continues to cut in and out, as you look back over your career, it's a career that spanned many different roles, truly global in nature. As you look forward to COP27 and beyond, what do you see as some of the major sustainability challenges, but also some of the major opportunities?
Well, Jim, thank you for joining me in this conversation, and thanks to the Chamber, our friends, Kush, Steve, and the rest of the team. we in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the various organizations that I interact with there look at the chamber as a great platform and as a great entry point into the American business community, but also as a convener of thought leaders and a place where many progressive policies are formulated through this platform and through the various discussions, and a great bridge between what's already a strong partnership between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States of America. Let me also just give also a bit of appreciation about PepsiCo. I grew up enjoying your products over many decades, but maybe a relevant story to our conversation is that 20 years ago, when I assumed a vice president role at Aramco at that time of business development, one of the first small projects I led was the extraction of carbon dioxide from our refinery in Riyadh and purifying it and directing it to bottling of carbonated products, primarily PepsiCo. And that's before sustainability and the circular carbon economy was fashionable and as seen as the imperative it is today. Now, going back, I think over even longer, I remember in the 90s when I was working within Aramco and the engineering services organization, that we joined various cross-industry and academia and research institution studies at that time, just trying to figure out, is climate change for real? Or is this, a cycle that is going to go away? And if it is for real, is it contributed to by man-made emission or not? That debate, of course, has continued, although it's thankfully declining. But we soon came to the conclusion in the kingdom that climate change is a man-made phenomena that we contribute to in our lifestyle, in our industrial infrastructure, agricultural practices, investment and logistics, and just how we manage the global economy. And we embarked, as I mentioned, 20, 30 years ago on a deliberate transition where the kingdom has been taking serious steps and putting our money where our mouths are. We were one of the first countries to mandate quick switching of refrigerants in air conditioning. And if you visited the kingdom, you know there is a lot of air conditioning in the kingdom, but there's also a lot of industrial chillers that consume a lot of refrigerants. And we joined the Montreal Protocol early, but we delivered and implemented. Today, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has the lowest footprint on the planet amongst the top producers in terms of our energy production, hydrocarbon production. Our oil is produced with almost no methane emissions, and we've joined the Global Methane Alliance. We're also calculating and measuring with sensors and devices every bit of leakage of CO2, and we hardly had any flaring in our fields. In the meantime, energy efficiency has been put in place as a key contributor, and it's amazing how much you can do with energy efficiency, which is a very low-hanging fruit for the business community to invest in. So yes, invest in the energy transition, clean up our agriculture and food value chain, but also energy efficiency at our individual level, family level, corporate companies, and certainly at the national level with the right regulations, the right incentives. But I think my answer is not just about Saudi. I think there is a global consensus today that has evolved, and I have been part of some of the COP discussions when I was Minister of Energy. There is a consensus that this is, as Minister Sameh Shukri said, existential for the world. I think what we're seeing today as we sit here happening in Pakistan, in Africa, the forest fires, the floods and famine in Ethiopia and elsewhere is just the latest reminder of many reminders that we've had that we need to take action. I'm happy to hear the minister say that we're moving clearly into implementation. I'm not sure I agree with him that there is a clear roadmap that has been developed in Glasgow and Paris and the previous COPs, but I think we can build it as we go. We don't have to wait until the roadmap is 100% built before we take action. But action is necessary, and we in the Kingdom have been taking action, but as I will hopefully be able to say in the few minutes we have today, our action speaks louder than words.
And so you've, as a business executive, you've made investments in sustainability long ago, and we certainly appreciate that and glad you're able to enjoy those bubbles that you helped create. And also as a government leader, but what are some of so there are good things to do and they're good for the planet, obviously. What are some of the barriers, and how, in your current position and the government as a whole of the Kingdom, how are you helping to address some of those barriers? What do you see, and what can we do about them?
Well, I think clear policies going forward are necessary. So despite the consensus I talked about, and despite the convergence that is slowly taking place between developed and developing countries, policies, in my opinion, are the big signal that the business community needs to see about where we're going to be. So there need to be predictability, that they will be across the world, not just in Europe, not just in some developed countries, that they will be cross-border carbon credits for green products that are manufactured. So if you're in a place like Saudi Arabia, where you could make your iron and steel and aluminum with hydrogen fuels and avoid putting fossil fuels in it and emitting a lot of CO2, that is going to be more costly. Hydrogen today is a lot more costly than gas. And therefore, per ton, per kilogram, your products are going to be more expensive. We need to have a stable, predictable pathway for the next 10, 20 years so that these investments are bankable, and they will go through the FIDs and the boards of the various investing entities in order to draw the corporate investments and the private sector investments to push these projects through. And these need to be at the international level harmonized. So predictability at the national level is very important, and countries need to put policies in place that give that predictability for the private sector. And I think we need harmonization. Taxonomy today is very confusing. What is a green product? What is green finance? What is compliant with ESG, and does BlackRock agree with MSCI? And there are so many funds and so many indices that are being proposed and being pushed out there. But the taxonomy and the standards and the harmonization amongst them, I think, is lacking. And if somehow through the COP, through the United Nations, through the WTO, World Bank and IFC, if we come to a convergence that not only addresses sustainability and the energy transition that is part of it, but also addresses the reality of today, which is lack of energy security. And this may sound like a digression, Jim, but today, as we're thinking about switching gas to renewables, there are many countries, including developed countries, that are switching back to biomass, burning more coal in industrial plants and power generation. There are people today in developed Europe, in some of the highest income per capita today. There are households that are piling up wood in their homes, or people who have removed their fireplaces are putting them back and putting chimneys because the winter is coming and they want to be able to stay warm. And that is going to be very costly to the environment. Hopefully, it's a one-year phenomena, and this winter will be the last one where we experience this. But I assure you, in developing countries that can't afford LPG and kerosene, they're also going out to the woods and cutting wood to cook and to stay warm. So energy security, affordability, weaving it together in an aggressive, accelerated energy transition, and making sure the private sector sees this pathway so that it invests in clean production of gas, pushing it through the highest efficiency gas-fired power plants, while pushing the limits on solar, wind, hydro, and of course storage, which is a big part of allowing us to accelerate the transition to pure.
You've talked about aggressive goals and certainty and helping the private sector know where countries are going. And in the kingdom, you've laid out some very aggressive goals with the 2030 vision and the Green Initiative. And there's a great quote that was in the Green Initiative. It says, "With the right mix of ambition, expertise, and innovation." And certainly I would subscribe to that personally as well. But can you share a little bit more about the project and the impact that it's having in Saudi specifically? And then are there some learnings for other countries that may want to emulate some of the things that you're doing?
Well, the Saudi Green Initiative was sort of the umbrella that brings together what Saudi Arabia is doing in terms of directing the economy towards sustainability. So it's not environmentally the right thing to do only, but His Royal Highness, our Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, saw it early. I have to admit, before I did, when I joined his government in 2015. He saw it as a great economic opportunity that the kingdom will not miss, and the kingdom will lead for the region and hopefully beyond for the world. And we started taking early steps. The kingdom, even before announcing last October, the Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle East Green Initiative in October of last year, we announced that our energy mix is going to be 50% renewables within 10 years. That is a very challenging target to have, not because we can't build the capacity for solar and wind in the kingdom. We think we can, but to have the reliable electricity supply around the clock and across the year would require a strong grid, as I mentioned, a lot of storage, and the right mix with backup from the cleanest gas being produced with the highest efficiency gas power plant. We designated some of our most pristine areas to be 100% emission-free. So NEOM project, one of the most ambitious, most audacious projects in technology, new living, livability, clean life, is going to be 100% renewable. Okay, and that project is under construction, and it's going to have to house 5 million people. It's not a small neighborhood in a town. The Red Sea tourism project, all the way from NEOM to the southern tip of the Red Sea on the east coast of the Red Sea. That project is going to start operations in terms of hosting tourists next year, and that project is going to be 100% renewable. Contracts are awarded, solar plants are being built, and the storage facilities are being installed. In terms of mitigation and the kingdom's role, the program has committed to 10 billion trees in Saudi Arabia. 10 billion, that is a huge number for a desert country that doesn't get a lot of water. And then we called on our neighbors and allies in the broader Middle East to join us on the Middle East Green Initiatives, which is 50 billion trees. So that is going to require a lot of afforestation within Saudi Arabia. Scientists are working on the most sustainable way to provide those types of plantations that are not going to be draining our limited aquifers and non-renewable water. The entire coast of Saudi Arabia is going to be planted with mangroves, and mangroves are the greatest CO2 sinks. And then we're also creating forests underwater with planting coral reefs in the Red Sea that are going to be resilient. These are specially bred corals in nurseries that have been constructed. This is the world's largest ever coral forestation underwater, and the first one is going to be more than $1 billion of investment in a project called Shusha Island of NEOM. This is one of the NEOM projects. It may not have been announced, and I may be breaking a secret, but I'm amongst friends here. But this is the kind of ambition that His Royal Highness has set us out to achieve. And these are only few. We have more than 60 initiatives under the Saudi Green Initiatives. There are more than 700 billion Saudi riyal, that is equivalent to $200 billion of investments that have been broken out for the private sector to be profitable, to be securitized by the government, to be co-funded by the government through concessionary finance from our lending institutions. So we're bringing all of the pieces together: policy, regulations, supportive finance, projects that have been developed that ultimately feed into what the global community wants to do, which is everybody contributing in a sustainable way. And sustainable is obviously not just environmental. When we say sustainable, we want it to be economically sustainable. We want it to create the jobs for our young population that is seeking those jobs.
Yeah, well, we'll have to talk. We have one of the leading mango juice drinks in Pakistan called Slice. So we'll have to talk about those mangoes afterwards. But I want to. You've mentioned a couple of times that the Green Initiative is more than just environmental. And at Pepsico we would agree. We have to take care of the communities, the farm workers, the whole supply chain. But I want to talk about a personal passion of yours, I know, which is in this vein, which is how, as we bring the young people along, science and technology, that's part of making the kingdom more sustainable, providing employment, building capabilities and strength. What are some of the, as you think about that, what would you tell young people who want to take those skills, learn those things, and make a difference in this broader definition of sustainability?
Well, let me give you an admission. I think it's the other way around. Young people are bringing us along on sustainability because they are leading the pack. I have 5 kids, and I have to say that I'm proud that all of them are there's a constant conversation on our dinner table. It's along the lines of, Dad, you need to do more on the environment and leave us a more sustainable planet to live in. Also, I mean, the fact of the matter is young people today are a lot more capable, innovative, and action-oriented and risk-taking than my generation when I was their age. And I think you're seeing it in various norms and ways of life, certainly through the entrepreneurship spirit that has become global today, and their ability to innovate and create. And I think we as governments, as corporations, need to create a lot of space, not necessarily provide a lot of specific prescriptive guidance to young people because I believe they could do better without too much guidance. But at the same time, I think as stewards in our different capacity, we do need to manage risks. So some alignment with what this generation is trying to do. But to them, I think they see climate action and they see sustainability as existential, and it is, and they see it as an opportunity, and it is. And like I said earlier in my earlier question, I think our role is to get out of the way when we're not adding value and provide support when we're holding the resources and make sure it's available. But I think the biggest unlock is obviously for young generation is the proper education system. So those who are working in and around education, whether it's formal or informal education through digital learning platforms, by companies, by governments, by entities, by NGOs, make sure we provide them that know-how, innovation by managing the RDI cycle from laboratories, accelerating, putting more venture capital into deep tech and avoid the temptation to fund only quick win technologies. I think the reality is that climate action is going to require bets on a lot of new technologies. I think neither electrification nor energy efficiency nor hydrogen alone is going to do it. We're going to require all of the above, and we're going to require some new pathways to a decarbonized world that we haven't discovered. So we have to go back and that's, I think, where I applaud some of the new legislation that has come out in the US, bipartisan, and a lot of it is feeding into the innovation cycle that has been good for the US, but good for us and the rest of the world. And in Saudi Arabia, we're doing exactly that. We're investing in innovation, we're investing in research and development, and entrepreneurship, and unleashing the power of our young people.
Great. And it's exciting that COP27 in Sharm will be the first COP with a dedicated youth pavilion. So we'll get a chance to create the space literally and give them a chance to come to the fore.
I'll just mention that I think it's in Pittsburgh, but a few months ago there was an ISIF competition for young people in science and technology. I think there were 20 to 25 Saudis. I think Saudi Arabia was either number 2 or 3 in terms of the nations that our young people won some of the awards for their innovative technologies. This is science-based competition, global. And I was happy to see that most of their innovations from Saudi Arabia were actually directed to environmental sustainability. These are school projects and university projects that were done sponsoring high school students. So I think we need to do more of this. This spirit needs to be supported.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's exciting. Final question: as you take your crystal ball out and help us think through, look beyond COP27, maybe even beyond 28. What are going to be the couple of issues that are most important to really continue moving forward, and what are the items that the kingdom is really focused on next?
Well, we're focusing on harnessing our renewable resources, and I've mentioned them already. The kingdom has an abundance of solar, almost unlimited. We also have wind power that complements the solar nicely, in that in some areas like Neom, it blows more at night and around the year, so we're able to get less volatility and variability in renewables. And we're going to convert it not only to electricity for the electrification and the 50% I mentioned, but we're going to also put it in our industrial products. And I think one thing very important, going back to the previous panel, countries that are endowed with these renewable resources and happen to be also endowed with mineral materials or petrochemicals, the global community need to encourage them to combine these resources together. And rather than exporting raw materials only for refining and manufacturing in the industrial north, add value to them where they are and create the sustainability also of the communities and the population of places like Africa, Middle East, Asia, that are developing, that have these endowment. And we're focusing on, I think, our most precious endowment, going back to your previous question, which is our young people. Men and women who are capable, have the best education. We spend 20% of our annual government budget on education, and we're getting some brilliantly capable people who are able to deliver. So all of these resources, I think, are going to set the kingdom apart in a country that has all that it takes to convert all these sources of energy, natural energy, human energy, financial energy, our leadership and its vision, put it all together and make the kingdom a platform for accelerating but managing with proper security the energy transition and the environmental transition to create a better and a more sustainable world for all of us.
Very well, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for your time, your insights, your perspective, and we appreciate it and look forward to continuing the dialogue as we move forward and the great opportunities that the kingdom presents.
Thank you, and thanks for what PepsiCo does. I mean, I know you're a great company, and we not only enjoy your carbonated products, I know you you do a lot of good things, including working with us on sustainability in Saudi Arabia. So thank you very much.
It is very difficult to follow a panel with one of the world's leading countries in terms of sustainability and public sector figures in Minister Khalid Al-Fallah and one of the world's leading corporates in that area, Pepsico. We ask everyone to please remain in the room in the interest of time. We're moving right on to our next panelist. So I invite the panelists from the financing panel to please come up. We need only, we don't need the fourth chair. No, you don't need yeah, we need, sorry, we need four, yes. Go ahead. Jake, come on. Hey, good to see you. Lena. Thank you very much. Good afternoon again. I'm Kush Choksi. I'm a Senior Vice President for Member Relations at the International Division of the U.S. Chamber and also Senior Vice President for Middle East and Central Asia. The panel that we have today is Financing a Sustainable Future, Advancing Public-Private Solutions to Closing the Finance Gap. The Chamber is prepared to leverage on the strengths of our institution to bolster the impact of the private sector into strategies and visions for COP27 in collaborating with the US and Egyptian governments, and then next year with the governments of countries such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia as we look to COP28. Financing is a critical part of both of those efforts as developing countries face investment gaps in their climate portfolios. Increased funding is critical to progress on climate solutions, even amongst the various pledges out there and the continual focus on energy and its continuing challenges. Yet, we are certain and optimistic that both public and private sector finance will step up and it will provide an efficient and reliant source of funding for these projects. It's certainly critical to developing countries in Africa, Middle East, and throughout the world. So with that, I'd like to get to our speakers. We'll first hear from Dr. Jerry Velasquez, the Director for Mitigation and Adaptation from the Green Climate Fund. Subsequent to that, we also have Jake Levine, who sets the vision and implements the climate financing agenda as Chief Climate Officer at the United States International Development Finance Corporation, DFC. And then from the private sector, we have Lena Osman from Standard Chartered Bank joining us. Lena is the Regional Head of Sustainable Finance West, where she develops relationships with financial sponsors in the Middle East and North Africa, as she advises clients on sustainable finance solutions and transition opportunities. So it's great to have you all with us. And let me start off with two questions for Jerry. Can you tell us a little bit about your organization's role in financing climate mitigation and adaptation projects?
Thank you very much. So as many of you know, the Green Climate Fund is the financial instrument of the Paris Agreement. It was created specifically to finance projects to address Paris. And of the many international funds out there, we are the largest of the multilateral international funds. It's quite interesting because not only are we mandated to work on adaptation mitigation, we are in fact, our target is half of our financing for adaptation. There was a discussion in the morning on too few investments on adaptation. Half of our investment, floor of it, should be on adaptation. And of that half, at least 50% should be on vulnerable countries, LDCs, SIDS, and African countries. So we do a lot of investment in that. A lot of our projects are cross-cutting. And we are a partnership organization. We have more than 130 partners that can channel our resources. We are capital agnostic. We can deliver grants. Half of our financing is in grants. And then on the other half are in loans, concessional, commercial, guarantee, and equity. But more importantly, we have very high risk appetite. And our goal is to actually take risks out of projects to make them viable, especially for private sector.
Just staying with the Green Climate Fund for a minute, could you tell us a little bit about some of the types of incentives that you offer in these partnerships?
So there's a lot of incentives that we do offer for the private sector to be crowded in. Number one, we use our grants to actually do a lot of the policy work, capacity building work that are actually necessary to enable markets, for example, or enable activities for the private sector. We also take a lot of risks from the private sector. Either it's financial risks. For example, we take first loss positions. In one of the projects that we've recently approved, it is the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. It's the largest blended finance that's dedicated for oceans. And in that, it's an equity fund, half a billion dollars, $500 million of equity for projects such as waste management and coastal management to preserve coral. The Green Climate Fund put in $125 million of first loss equity, allowing then other investors to come in to assure that. We also have taken up other projects in Shandong province in China. Our project, that's a $1.5 billion project. In fact, the GCF took in, again, first loss position that doubled the viability of the actual projects, allowing other investors to come in. The other thing we did is we actually put in some of our TA support to green the financial institutions in China, allowing them to actually build track record in lending for green financing. And then finally, the other thing we do is that for certain projects, such as, for example, hard to abate projects such as low emission transport or industry, there's still need for concessionality and blended finance. And the private sector needs some of those risks taken out because the profits are simply not viable enough for them to to make it a viable project. So we did one project in Pakistan, the first ever zero emission bus rapid transport in the world. It is biomethane. So what we did is we helped the government build a biomethane plant, and then we also helped the government purchase buses, like biomethane buses, first ever in the world. And then, so we allowed the private sector, therefore we took in front and center the upfront capital costs, allowing then the private sector to come in and make the project very much viable. So we're doing this, also we're in the lookout for similar projects for industry. We would like to work on low carbon manufacturing, for example, cement, steel, and so on. These are the kind of projects that we would like to work on in the future because they're hard to abate. And we think that the risk taking approach of the GCF would add a lot of value.
That's tremendously helpful. And I know because our event started late that you have another event to go to. We appreciate your indulgence of us and the time greatly. One last thing before you will leave. Clearly, there may be many in the room, different companies, different sectors. How do they engage with you?
So the easiest way to engage with us is to work with accredited partners. So we have quite a large number of accredited partners, Deutsche Bank, MUFG, Pegasus Capital Advisors, and so on. We also work a lot with most of the multilateral development banks, IFC, AFDB. The easiest way is to work with them. Most of our private sector projects are facilities. They are delegated, so we create a very large facility. The sub-projects are delegated to our partner, and then you then develop and approve the projects based on market conditions. So this is the usual way that we approach. It's usually multi-country, and so if there's interest, we would be more than happy to work with you, and I think there's a lot of possibility to collaborate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you again for your time. Turning to other panelists, and I'll start with Lena and then move to Jake. But if you can tell us a little bit, starting here with you, Lena, about Standard Chartered's role in financing climate mitigation and adaptation projects, and then I'll turn to Jake for the same thing when it comes to DFC.
No, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. It's really great to be here. From a Standard Chartered perspective, we have been quite focused on this over the last 4 to 5 years. We've actually started our journey within sustainability generally a very long time ago, in the 90s or so, I'm told. But then we have been more focused on looking at the risks of, or the environmental risks of some of these projects. And over the last 4 years, we have kind of put together a team that's purely focused on providing sustainable finance solutions and ideas to our clients. It's a product agnostic team, so we kind of work across different banking products and therefore present a one-stop shop for clients in terms of what kind of markets or liquidity pockets they can tap into, how can they put together frameworks that are either green or social. But we also have been quite focused on the just transition as well. We've heard this morning from the panelists from Ghana and Nigeria how important that is, and that is something that we're very focused on in terms of looking at the S in the ESG as well, and looking at the social projects that we could, and the upskilling or the green skilling of workers as well. A lot of the work that we do has been either just focused on the kind of guidelines and principles that you need to be accounted for, or that apply to you in a sustainable finance market, but also looking at newer areas. So newer areas or newer markets that we could tap into that could help with mobilizing capital to especially to the markets where that need it most, but also that are also struggling to kind of get that access to the credit. This we've been doing through ESG advisory. We've been looking at the blended finance market and looking at the different instruments within blended finance, but focusing also on building pace and scale in terms of how much of capital can you access from the private market by investing $1 from the public sector. And obviously the carbon markets is a very big space for us. We are very focused on being part of the voluntary markets. Our CEO used to chair the task force for scaling voluntary carbon markets, which has now evolved into the Integrity Council, and we're quite active in also building the guidelines and ensuring any kind of greenwashing implications are addressed and mitigated.
Thank you, Lena, and I'm going to come back to a number of things that you touched on. But Jake, turning to you, DFC, if you can tell us a little bit about DFC's role in financing climate mitigation, adaptation, what your investment parameters are and your strategy, that would be very helpful.
Sure. Thanks, Kush, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this event. You guys have been excellent partners as we proceed on the road to COP27. We're looking forward to having a successful COP together in Egypt. DFC is the U.S. Development Bank, and we provide financing across the board for private sector partners in low and middle income countries around the world. We have a dual mission, which is focused on the one hand on development, and on the other hand on advancing the US strategic interest overseas. And we see climate mitigation, climate adaptation, investing, and financial support as central to both of these missions. I guess I'll just sort of take one second to share a bit about a meeting that I had last night with the foreign minister of Pakistan, who shared with us about what's happening there in terms of the devastation that they're grappling with and really confronting in the wake of these record rains and glacial melt, where you have 4 million acres of farmland that has been inundated, completely underwater. If the floodwaters don't recede in the next couple of weeks, they will miss the harvest for this season. And so you'll have an entire wheat harvest that goes lost. They have $30 billion of losses. And one of the things that the foreign minister shared that I thought was particularly stunning was that in the wake of the 2010 floods, which were also historic in scale, they rebuilt their infrastructure and they raised it up high and they built it to be resilient for these types of 100-year and 500-year floods. And that rebuilt infrastructure was washed away. So we have entered a new era, and I think that this gap that we see in terms of adaptation financing that is so painfully apparent in Pakistan is also just reflective of the mitigation gap that we failed to finance, where you're talking about places around the world that have basically not contributed at all to climate change, and they are not getting any financing or support to mitigate the effects of climate change. Now, DFC has about a few $100 million of clean energy projects deployed in Pakistan. We have 5 wind projects. We're excited to do more. I'm eager to go there and meet with the private sector and see what we can do in the way of food security, clean energy, climate smart buildings, built environment, infrastructure. But I think that what's exciting about this group that you've convened and what DFC does is that our entire theory of change is that the government can't do this alone. We can only solve this problem by mobilizing the resources of the private sector, by mobilizing the resources that you have at your disposal to use our tools, our guarantees, our political risk insurance, our, I don't want to get in trouble for being too aggressive, but our low-cost financing, our technical assistance, and to bring all of that together in a blended way to really address these gaps in both mitigation and adaptation financing.
Thank you. You've both addressed something I was going to ask, which I really appreciate, the additional tools and solutions that you employ and deploy. Can you tell us, are there a few, pilot projects or examples that you can point to as success stories? We'll start with you, Lena, that would illustrate what you've been talking about.
Yeah, of course. I mean, for example, we helped the Ministry of Finance in Ghana put together a framework for the type of projects that they would finance. And that was kind of a mix of both use of proceeds and sustainability linked in order to address some of the projects that they are looking at specifically from a social perspective as well, on the KPIs side of things, whether it's healthcare and education. But we have equally also worked with other entities. For example, in Nigeria, with Axis Bank of Nigeria, we've helped them with putting together a structure whereby we brought one of the investors and we put a structure together in a way. It was a green private placement, but it also helped them access the market in a way that was cost effective due to the underlying structure that we put in place. So employing a lot of these banking ideas is really important because it helps not only with the access to the capital but the cost of the financing as well. And that's something that we're very focused on because of the nature of the markets that we exist in. We do quite a lot of work on the renewable energy side of things. We helped one of the developers, for example, from the UAE, on a project which was a floating solar project in Indonesia. So a lot of the work that we do as well taps into our network in a way because we have strength in some of these jurisdictions, and therefore can direct our expertise within both markets by knowing the sponsor, but also by knowing the project and which is a core footprint market for us, and kind of bringing that together and help deploy it. We've worked on quite a few transactions as well from an M&A perspective. Last year, for example, with Alcazar Energy, which has certain projects, renewable energy projects in Egypt, Jordan. So these are kind of just some of the types of transactions. We're quite active in the social space as well. So from the perspective of bringing in social financing, whether it's from access to water, sustainable infrastructure, affordable housing, and affordable healthcare and education as well, where we work very closely with a lot of the ECAs that are looking more closely at this space now, and that are evolving their thinking around how they cater their restrictions that they have and ease those a little bit when it comes to green and social projects.
Thank you, Lena. Jake, same question to you. Some examples of things that DFC has done, particularly if they're from the Middle East area or Africa, that you could share?
Definitely. So, I mean, a couple of the things that we think about a lot in terms of how we're deploying our tools is how much capital from the private sector are we able to mobilize? And to Lena's point, can we help reduce the costs of financing? Because perversely, the cost of financing in the markets where we work is much higher. And that's obviously a bar to investment. So we're really focused on bringing down costs. I think of a couple of transactions, one in Egypt, which we were excited to do this year, where we helped support the issuance of a new green note that helped to refinance a significant portion of the Benban Solar Park. We did this in partnership with Scatec and with a series of other lenders. And what we were able to do on that refinancing was essentially take out DFI financiers, MDB lenders, and bring in capital from institutional investors. We got interest from pension funds, from a pension fund in Korea, from a pension fund in Japan, who for the first time said, we actually want to have a slice of this Egyptian risk because we see tremendous upside potential in this specific project. What we were able to provide in terms of credit enhancements on that transaction was we extended the tenor of the note. We were able to bring down the cost of borrowing a little bit, and that allowed Scatec to reinvest in future projects. Similarly, we've been working on a concept that we've now executed once publicly. We're going to do another one very soon, maybe a third, in the world of blue bond and debt restructuring. And this is a super creative structure because what we're able to do is contribute political risk insurance to the issuance of a new bond that helps retire sovereign debt and also secure a commitment from a government to reinvest proceeds from the debt financing into concrete policy projects. So in the blue bond that we did in Belize, that was a $354 million debt restructuring that will create $80 million of reinvestment into coastal ecosystems, fishery economies, coral reef. It's going to double the size of the protected Belize Barrier Reef from its existing size. And it's critical for the local economy. And the sort of the financing trick that happened there was DFC's political risk insurance, which is rated at investment grade, was able to raise Belize's issuance of a bond from sub-investment grade to investment grade and bring down the cost of financing for everybody. So that's super creative work. I will just say, I was at a different event earlier this week where I heard one of our clients who is the founder of a company called Sun King. They're the biggest distributed energy provider in Kenya. They work all over sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of South Asia. They've driven the market in Kenya to be 20% distributed energy generation on rooftops. And something he said stuck with me, which was, the kind of financing that we want is the most boring financing that you could imagine, right? Like, this innovative stuff is cool and sexy, and we want to do more blue bonds, but ultimately we want to be boring and standardized and doable at scale, because when you get to that level of repetition and comfort, you can really bring down perceptions of risk and costs.
Well, thank you. We've heard the panel has had to be brief. I've given a signal that we need to move to the next panel, given interest of time. But Standard Chartered, from the private sector perspective, is known to everyone. We certainly know how to get a hold of Lena and Standard Chartered. So happy to address questions directly to them after the panel, or we'll help you connect with them. And DFC, we always know where to get a hold of the US government, and certainly the DFC. So they're both complements to each other when it comes to finance. And we thank you for your time. We ask if anyone has a question, if you can stay around for a minute or two, but we certainly will volunteer to get a hold of you. So thank you very much.
Thanks you. Thanks very much.
Please come on up. I can invite the next group of panelists up here. We've got two more panels in a little over an hour. We're going to fit all of this in because we've got some great conversations yet to have. So Peter, please have a seat there, and we'll be joined by Jeff and Roger. And your choice, gentlemen, if you want to keep your name tags on or not. I hear the live stream's going really well and looks really good, so maybe we pull it. They can't read that anyway from this.
You saved the day. No one else had the.
Well, again, thanks everybody for sticking with us here this morning. We've heard some really great conversations about what's needed for us to meet the ambitious climate change, or address the climate agenda. From finances we've just heard, but what has to happen for us to really scale up adaptation, to be able to enhance financing and move financing to where it's needed. What I'm excited about for this panel is we've got three companies that are actually working on specific projects on one of the things we keep hearing about, which we have to decarbonize the economy. And these are three companies that are right in the middle of that. So I want to jump right in, and I'm going to tee up a question for each of you about your company, but then we'll get into some broader questions. So Jeff, starting with you, with Chevron. Everyone is familiar with Chevron as an oil and gas company. Of course, you've got, that's a company that takes a very holistic approach towards sustainability. I don't think as many people know about the Chevron New Energies and the venture that you are now leading there. So I think it would be worthwhile just to take a few minutes and let us know what it is that you're leading for the company.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. It's funny, this room, I have to start with a personal story, is we held our Chevron Investor Day in this room for probably 15 or 20 years. And in a former role, I was the investor relations manager. Anyone that has an IR manager should hug that person every day. And so it's funny to be back in this room. I spent several years in this room sweating right over there as I was supporting our executives on the show that they were providing our investors. So it's great to be back in this room. It's funny. It's surreal. So different role for me now, president of Chevron New Energies. Our approach to climate change and lower carbon is very straightforward and I think very simple. We're doing everything we can to support our traditional oil and gas businesses, very important around the world, particularly today, but doing everything we can to lower the carbon intensity of those businesses. And we're starting from a position of strength. We lead in this space already, but we've set targets to lower that carbon intensity even further. And we've been very detailed in those targets, and we'll hold ourselves accountable to meeting those targets. The second part of the strategy is what we announced last summer in the creation of new low carbon businesses and solutions. And that's what Chevron New Energies is. It includes renewable fuels, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, carbon offsets, and emerging technologies such as geothermal, for instance. These new businesses support the decarbonization efforts in our traditional businesses, but they'll also serve third-party customers in hard-to-abate, difficult-to-electrify sectors. All of these new businesses link very well with existing strengths and capabilities of our company. So we really feel like we can add something to these technologies. We can grow these businesses to a material size. So last summer, we leaned forward on setting ambitious targets for later this decade on how fast we think we can scale these businesses. And we also announced a tripling of our capital investment to $10 billion over an 8-year period. And Chevron's a large company with a large capital budget, but when you announce that almost 15% of that budget's going to be dedicated to the lower carbon, the new energy space, that's quite significant. So that's what we're trying to do.
Excellent. That's really helpful. So Roger, GE. Literally a household name. If my dishwashers and refrigerator haven't anything to say about it, but a company's been around for 130 years or more. But just recently announced the launch of GE Vernova, focusing on the innovation needed for the clean energy transition and decarbonizing the economy. So give us a little sense of what GE's mission is there and how that effort moved forward.
Thank you, Marty. Be happy to, but I have to just pause for a second and thank you to you and the Chamber for your leadership here. I had the honor of interacting with the Chamber at COP26 in Glasgow, and I saw firsthand the positive impact and the presence the Chamber was bringing to those discussions and the role of businesses. I've seen a very strategic ramp up to COP27 from the earliest days. It's almost like we left Glasgow and you already started thinking about Egypt. I know you have a great team here. So I just want to recognize the work you're doing is important and making a difference, and we appreciate supporting you in any way we can. I was very envious of Jeff when he talked about how their approach is very simple and straightforward. Because one thing about GE is we make everything very complicated and challenging. So we're the opposite, but in a good way, because we think this is very challenging and the part we're focused on. So as you point out, we're a 130-year-old company and founded by Thomas Edison. We've always had this theme that we want to use innovation and technology to lift up the quality of life of people everywhere, whether those are appliances or healthcare equipment, connecting people through aviation or energy. And so our equipment provides 1/3 of the world's energy in 175 countries. 90% of all the world's energy providers use GE's equipment. And so with that footprint, with that role of innovation and technology, and with that global significant presence, we certainly want to rise to the challenge of addressing climate change and solving the energy transition. And we see it as this maybe is the simple part of it. We see it as a two-prong approach. We want to decarbonize the energy sector with our global presence, with our technology. We feel like we're uniquely positioned to innovate the technology to decarbonize the energy sector. But just as importantly, at the same time, we want to grow resiliency in the energy infrastructure. 750 million people in the world lack access to affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity. The grid needs to be modernized to address growing cybersecurity, weather events, the variability of renewables, and growing demand. So we want to do both these things simultaneously: decarbonize the energy sector in 170 countries while growing more access so kids can turn the lights on and do their homework, and parents have access to healthcare and their jobs and things like that. So our approach is a really diversified one. This is where the complexity comes in. The most obvious part is you want to grow renewables as quickly as possible. We have the leading onshore wind turbine in the US. We have the largest offshore wind turbine that's been built. We think gas power has a very important role to play. Frequently in a lot of places in the world, the quickest way to decarbonize is to use gas. And while using our efficient gas turbines, we don't see that as a 30-year commitment to greenhouse gases. Our gas turbines already can run on hydrogen. More than 100 turbines have run more than 6 million hours on hydrogen, 8 million hours on hydrogen. So we see that long-term decarbonization approach. We think the grid is maybe the understated story here. Modernizing the grid through physical and digital tools is really key to all this, and every country should be focused on that. That's the real short-term opportunity. And so if we combine those three things, growing renewable energy, a strong foundation in efficient gas, and then a modernized grid, that gets you somewhere, but it's not enough. And we know it's not enough. And so we have to innovate the next generation of breakthrough technologies. And there we're leading innovation in small modular nuclear reactors. We have a product we hope will be coming online in 2028. Hydrogen as a fuel, carbon capture sequestration, and energy to make sure that we're thinking around the corner to really get to those net zero goals.
Excellent. That's a very helpful thing. I appreciate that, Roger. So Peter, SAP is not as much of a household name, but you guys are involved in everything. In fact, if the numbers I've got it right, your customers generate 87% of global commerce.
Right.
So as I think about the role that SAP has played in helping the customers with sustainability, I think of the adage that you can't manage what you can't measure. And that's something that you help your customers do. So I just wonder if you could just explain what SAP does with its customers to help them as they strive toward their own sustainability goals.
Sure. First, I noticed that you seated us in the two hair follicle challenge guys at the end here. So
hoping you wouldn't notice.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to the Chamber, and thank you all for listening. I think I'll break this down to 3 points because I think it's always easier to remember things that way. First, we embed sustainability solutions into core business processes. We have a couple of our customers here, and they use our tools, I think, in various of their, a number of their processes to see where that carbon molecule is, to see where it starts, to see where it ends. So really embedding our solutions into the real core business processes from finance to supply chain is key. And what that technology then does is offer transparency throughout the value chain of a company. We not only allow companies to extract data, a lot of software can do that, but our software allows those deep insights into that data to see where, again, that carbon molecule is, to see where you can move it around or track, trace, and hopefully mitigate it. And then, lastly, this is basically the point I just made, but it's an important word, and you'll hear me say it a lot today. If I get another question to answer, is transparency. From start to finish, think of us as a lens over a company. We allow a company those deep insights into, again, tracking full transparency from beginning to end. The Scope 3 emissions that you hear a lot about, in today's sessions and elsewhere, those are the ones that are hard to track, hard to trace, hard to mitigate, and that's where we think technology can play a huge role. 90% of those emissions in the Scope 3, most companies can't tell you where they are. SAP does a great job of mitigating our own footprint. But what we can't do is look, or what we're trying to do now, and what we're working very hard to do by 2030 is look far outside of just our company operations into things like the flights that our employees take, the miles that they drive, those sorts of things, so we can really get the transparency across the entire value chain.
Excellent, great, thank you. Well, while we're talking about a global challenge here, let's turn domestically and talk policy for a moment. As we've heard, between the bipartisan infrastructure bill at about $60 billion over the Department of Energy, or the Inflation Reduction Act that just passed, I would argue the CHIPS Act is also something that is very important for climate, and would take one step further back to the Energy Act of 2020 to move government from just R&D to playing a role in deployment. So with all of that, I want to get your thoughts on how your company views the different opportunities that were presented by those policies. In fact, I think there's been some really significant progress made here in the U.S. to help us play a leadership role in the global climate challenge. So whether it's specific provisions there, or just more broadly how those policies are helping companies like yours and your customers, or what have you. So we'll just start with you again, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, it's clearly significant. And we've talked a lot about that public-private partnership is what's going to make all of this work faster and much more effectively. And this is a great demonstration of that in a very important region for our company, although we're looking at a lot of different regions throughout all of our operations around the world. So it's significant. When you launch new energies like we did last year, and you announce the amount of capital that we're willing to invest or planning to invest in these segments, it takes, you have a sense of where the policy is going to go in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world, but there's a very broad range of uncertainty. What this legislation has done, particularly the Inflation Reduction Act, has narrowed that around some of these specific business lines. So that does a number of things. It provides more confidence in moving even faster in some of these investments. It makes the commercial discussions with customers, if I think about CCUS for a moment, working with emitters inside our company and outside of the company, it provides more commercial space to actually get some of these agreements signed and done. It also increases the size of the market almost overnight. Now the emissions that we can tackle, given the increase in 45Q, and we're focused more on permanent sequestration, to $85 a ton, all of a sudden you can tackle a much broader suite of emissions. So the market's gotten a lot bigger, but it does. And so for CCUS, obviously that's something that we're focused on. There's a direct tie to hydrogen projects for us, using natural gas as the feedstock, although we're looking at a lot of green hydrogen opportunities. It does a lot for the green hydrogen space. Our view on hydrogen is you need all sources of hydrogen. Diversity of supply in the hydrogen space is as important as it is in the traditional space. That's our view going forward. But it sends a broader message. I think the impact more broadly, and you can feel it here, this week. U.S. intends to lead in this space, and the IRA was a great example of that. That allows more investment to come into this country. It allows more partners to come into this country who we will work with to make these technologies a reality. It also sends a signal to the rest of the world. Or almost a roadmap of this is what you need to do to actually scale and grow these businesses. And time is not our friend here. So I think we benefit in many different ways. And I'm not speaking just from the Chevron benefit in these new energies businesses. There's very large global benefits on the back of these policies.
Great, thank you. Roger, your thoughts on the same?
I would echo everything Jeff said. And from an energy perspective, it feels like as we're having this conversation today, we're now in a transition, we're in a pivotal moment in addressing climate change. I think in a number of ways, the way the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act works, the way the IRA works. One is we've been spending the last couple of years talking about the policies and what we'd like to see in policies. What's the role of gas? How aggressive on renewables? The role of hydrogen, carbon capture, nuclear, all these things. We now have the policies. Between those two acts, the table has been set, and we have that certainty as you move forward. And the second, which I think is a really important point, is the role of companies moving forward. This is not a command and control approach. This is not where government, they'll have some guidances to do. They're partnering, but the execution falls on companies, whether it's GE, whether it's our customers, Chevron, others. And so it reinforces the notion that as we move forward with climate change, the IRA is kind of delegating that authority to implement this technology, to build this technology. They're partnering with us, they're creating these financial incentives, but it's going to be the companies that are delivering and building it. And that's just a fundamental change to how we've approached climate change regulation in the past. I think it is a good template, as Jeff points out, for the rest of the world. And the three kind of things that we see as real positives in this approach is, one, the carrots nature of it, that it's incentivizing companies. It's not against anything. It's incentivizing companies, partnering with us, sharing the risk so that we can go out and use the technology to have the markets get to those emission reductions while also addressing energy security at the same time, which is a really important point. It's not just climate change, it's also energy security and so on. So there's that carrots approach. The second is the all of the above approach. And Jeff touched on this. It's not against anything. It supports renewable energy, nuclear energy, hydrogen, carbon capture, implicitly, helping with the viability of gas and turbines and things like that long term. So that all of the above approach and technology neutral approach is really important. And the third, which may be the most impactful, is this period of 10 years at least of certainty. And these are such big investments. When we talk about our offshore wind projects, we're planning projects today and technologies that may come online in 2028. And when you're looking at these types of horizons, you need that period of certainty to make those big investments. So having 10 years versus is this going to happen every other year is really going to help facilitate the success there.
Excellent. Thank you, Roger. It's helpful. Peter, again, whether it's IRA, the Infrastructure Bill, CHIPS Act, or anything else, how is SAP viewing this?
Well, I know we're short on time, so I can offer a very brief answer. I agree with everything that's said. I think, going back to my previous answer, measuring all this is going to be really important. Even with some of these new technologies, that are going to offer tremendous benefits down the road, building those things will emit carbon. Will, in the short term at least, create some need to track and trace how those things are being built. Technology can do that. We can do that. The tax incentives alone is a super complex. Is going to be a super complex thing to implement. Software is going to help with things like that. And then lastly, we're really excited about sort of the ecosystem effect that was just touched on. Not only are these new industries being infused with all this capital, but it's going to create, beneficial knock-on effects. And I think, lead to a lot of new business, a lot more market space. And again, I think having the technology to sort of measure all that growth and measure the outputs is going to be key.
Good. Roger, you've touched on this a bit already, but IEA I think now says that there's roughly still 750 million people in the world without access to reliable electricity, and so this whole balance between the need for just transition and moving to cleaner energy while also ensuring what we call energy security. I would tell you for myself or the chamber, we've always been saying these aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, we're not going to get to the the energy transition if we aren't also paying close attention to energy security globally. I mean, I think that the world stage is showing us that in real time at the moment. So I guess just asking to elaborate more on kind of how you and GE view this this balancing the energy security and energy transition.
I think you said it well when they're not mutually exclusive, and that's why we're excited about COP27 in Egypt, and why the Chamber's role has been so important, because we think this will be a COP that represents that Egypt and other countries, emerging economies, they want to be the proof point for saying, we care about decarbonizing the economy too. We want to play our role. We want to be part of these breakthrough technologies, but we also represent people who need to be served better by reliable electricity and more access and more resiliency in that. And so our approach, this is the simple, straightforward part of it, is to do both at the same time. That as you're building out your renewable energy structure, what's your foundation for that? Do you have that resilient grid to begin with? Are you modernizing your grid to address weather events, to address the growing demand, to address the variability of renewables? Do you have that foundation with turbines that are necessary to kind of create the backbone for a reliable grid on which you can deploy renewables. So when you take a pragmatic view like that, and you're not just deciding you're going to prejudge, you just want to do one thing, but you're taking this more pragmatic view, that's a holistic view of the energy ecosystem, then you're both reducing your emissions and you're also making the grid more resilient at the same time. And it's not just an emerging economy issue. We're having plenty of challenges in the US, as everybody knows, maintaining the grid in this circumstance. So we're looking forward to the Infrastructure Act, where I think we need to be a little more aggressive, frankly, in deploying that capital so we can bring that type of modernization and resiliency here at home, which is going to be critical. As we're building more renewables, we need to modernize the grid at the same time if we're going to meet those resiliency requirements. We know we can do it. We just have to make those investments.
Excellent point. Jeff, what would you add to that?
I agree 100%. You know, it's an all of the above approach. I'm always perplexed about when we talk about energy transition, but sometimes we forget the transition. Part of transition implies time, and we want to move quickly towards this. We know the world's desire to move in that direction, including many of our or all of our customers feel exactly the same way, and we want to be a part of that. We think we can be a meaningful part of that, but it's going to take time to get there. And under any scenario that you look at in the future, even a net zero scenario by 2050, there's still a significant amount of oil and gas demand in the world. Like I said, we need to do everything we can to lower the carbon intensity of those products while growing some of these new products. But this is just going to take time.
Great. Peter, let me turn to you, and I guess I'll ask each of you this question. But what's either an energy trend or an innovation that's out there, technology that you're looking at that maybe isn't on everybody's radar screen right now, or that you're just really excited about as far as how we're going to be able to make real progress toward these ambitious goals, and obviously in partnership with our government allies and others.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a few things I could talk about. I'll just focus on one: artificial intelligence. I think, and this goes back to the thing I've been harping on since the beginning here: transparency. I think having artificial intelligence embedded in a lot of the solutions that we and others in our industry have, layering that on top of all these things we're talking about building and implementing will really help dig out those insights, provide solutions in much quicker time than we could, having a bunch of people number crunch and data crunch. So I think the promise of AI, I think we're finally turning that corner where it's gone from hype to actual real benefits, and I think we're going to see some huge strides there that apply to this whole sustainability topic we're talking about now. It's happening now, and we'll see that accelerate in the coming years.
Well, I won't limit you to one if there's another one you wanted to point.
Well, I was going to go into the whole metaverse thing, but I think I don't want to lose the room here. So
we could all get our Oculus glasses on and join you there.
Well, but on that real quick, since you've given me an overview, these guys can talk about it more, but it will allow technicians to sit in an office, put on those things, and repair turbines that are having problems out in the middle of the ocean. Providing that quick, those sorts of tools to provide that quick access, can cut down on downtime, can increase operational time, and there's a lot of benefits like that we'll see very soon.
Excellent, great. Roger?
I'd say in addition to the grid point, which I think is really important, that's the most near-term thing we can do to both address energy security and climate. I think the comeback story of the last 12 months has been nuclear. I'm hugely optimistic both on our existing nuclear, but on small modular reactors. And that's, I think, a technology you're going to be hearing a lot more about. You're probably going to be seeing more. So that has been the comeback story. And not only in the US, but more global support and rallying around the future of nuclear and small modular reactors.
Right. No, glad to hear you say that. We've been very supportive ourselves. Jeff?
Yeah, I go maybe in a different direction. We're looking at all sorts of technologies. We have a technology ventures organization that's been around for 2 decades, has investments in nuclear and a wide range of technologies. We know that's going to head one way, and there'll be technologies we're not even cognizant today or barely cognizant of that will be much, much bigger in the years to come. But I'd maybe go on the opposite side. Technology, the economics, the politics of all this, very challenging. But you can't forget the people side of this.
Yeah.
And that sounds maybe like a soft, less tangible response, but it's probably one of the most important enablers of this. And it goes down to the societal impact of this transition. Is the energy we're providing reliable? Is it affordable and ever cleaner? It's we didn't talk about permitting,
right?
But it's great to have these large concepts around CCUS hubs, hydrogen production facilities, the infrastructure required. But getting it permitted and built is a huge challenge. So how does society participate in that, not just in the U.S., but elsewhere? And then the final thing is just the human resources that we dedicate to this. And I can tell you from our organization, a small organization within a mega company, we pull a lot of support from the rest of Chevron, but we are long opportunities and we are always short people. And I think every organization in governments feel exactly the same way. So close with our ability to partner and collaborate with each other instead of competing to see who can kind of get there fastest. I think that's the name of the game in this space. So I hope to see a lot more of that going forward.
I'm so glad you raised that. It is so easy to overlook the people aspect of that and what that means. Personal privilege here. I wanted to ask you, 35 years ago, I think I visited Chevron's geothermal facilities in California, and you've been a major leader in that. Is that something we're going to see grow as well?
We will. We're focused on novel technologies, not the traditional traditional geothermal sources. So advanced geothermal systems. Western part of the U.S. and also some Asia Pacific, opportunities. That's a part of that emerging bucket that I spoke to earlier, and something again that we bring skill sets to that, subsurface skill sets that are valuable, and so we see that as a part of all of the above solutions. It might not be as large as hydrogen, as large as renewable fuels or CCUS, but significant potential there in a fast-growing sector.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Jeff, Roger, Peter, thank you so much for joining us here today. Great conversation, a lot to think about for everyone here. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.
I'm going to ask our next panelist, Denise, Barry, and Mars, if you can come forward and please take your seats. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for being with us today, and Marty, thank you and your panelists for that really interesting panel. Our final panel today is about advancing innovation to meet the global climate challenge, highlighting technologies and perspectives from U.S. industry leaders. I'll get to introducing our three panelists, but I do want to start by saying we're really delighted to have with us to kick off the panel with some framing remarks, the Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources, just sworn in, if I'm correct, Jeff Pyatt. So we really look forward to having some opening comments from the new Assistant Secretary, and then we'll turn to our panel. I'll introduce all of them and we'll get into the discussion. I know for this panel, we're very much looking forward to offering policy and practical priorities that can be raised at COP27 that are going to drive technology innovation and deployment going forward, and also look to explore additional ideas on partnerships and policy and funding areas that needed to be brought forward that can bring key solutions to scale. So with that, Assistant Secretary, I'd love to invite you to the podium for some opening comments to help frame the discussion.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Thank you to the Chamber for the invitation. This is a perfect setting, and the last presentation was really a perfect setup. Because my decision to make this event one of my first public speaking engagements as the newly appointed Assistant Secretary for Energy Resources reflects the US government's recognition of how important the private sector is to facilitating an energy transition. But it also reflects my own commitment as a career State Department economic officer to making sure we are mobilizing all of our tools of economic statecraft in order to support American business abroad. I joked with Roger after the last presentation, I feel like I've been working for GE for 30 years in different parts of the world. I could say the same about Honeywell and a lot of our other companies. Throughout my career, I have seen firsthand what the deployment of innovative technologies developed by America's unmatched private sector can do to create opportunity when that technology is combined with the right policy environment. And that's why the State Department's E&R Bureau has a mission to support countries in developing policies that will help them to mobilize investment for energy infrastructure. Energy resources and our American energy companies have been central to America's position of global leadership for many years. The Biden administration's recent accomplishments are helping to ensure that we retain that leadership position through the ongoing and dramatic transformation of the global energy system, from one built around fossil fuels to one focused on renewable sources. And as we are seeing in Europe's efforts to curtail reliance on Russian gas and oil, the energy transition is about more than just decarbonization. It's about national security. It's about affordability. And it's about the future of our shared environment. We are at a unique moment in history. Global energy markets are in the midst of a profound shift as falling clean energy technology costs and shifting regulatory priorities upend the economics of the power sector. Renewables are increasingly cheaper than their fossil counterparts, and coupled with new energy storage and efficiency options, are disrupting traditional energy market models. Just look at the numbers. Over the past decade, solar PV costs have fallen by 82%. Onshore wind costs have fallen by 39%. And lithium-ion battery costs have fallen by 90%. Renewables are now the least cost source of new bulk electricity generation in countries that together represent 2/3 of the world's population and about 72% of global GDP. Last year, global investment in energy efficiency by leading American companies like Dow, GE, Google, Citi reached $290 billion. Energy efficiency accounts for 2.1 million jobs in the United States. And I believe our private sector is uniquely positioned to bring capital and technology to bear on this climate challenge more quickly than any other country in the world. At the same time, in order to transform the energy system, we need to tackle hard-to-abate sectors like shipping and aviation. And that means significant investment in technologies that are not yet at commercial scale. Unfortunately, the organic pace of energy transformation is not sufficient to meet either our climate goals or our energy security requirements. And that's where government policy comes in. The Inflation Reduction Act represents a game-changing investment of $369 billion in climate and clean energy. The IRA will drive innovation and create unprecedented market demand for the technology and resources required to meet climate goals in the United States and globally. As the IAEA Executive Director, Fatih Birol, put it to me yesterday, globally, the IRA is the single most important energy sector development since Paris in 2015. And I was very glad in this regard to hear Chevron's Jeff Gustafson make exactly the same point in the panel just before us. We are working flat out to leverage innovation and the private sector's clean energy goals to support national climate targets. To meet their corporate net zero commitments, over 1,000 companies worldwide across all sectors have committed to using clean energy to power their global operations and supply chains. Many of these companies' energy requirements are as large as a small nation. And if they can meet their targets, imagine the effect on global emissions and economic growth. Despite the demonstrated demand and potential for driving new investment, there are challenges for companies buying clean energy in power systems that have been built around fossil fuels. In some cases, this requires policy reforms that are unfamiliar, while in others, it involves strengthening the electricity grids. These actions are important in their own right, but sending the demand signal for clean energy can drive innovation and the policy reforms needed to support clean energy procurement. And that's where the Clean Energy Demand Initiative, or SETI, helps provide a platform to aggregate company demand, to understand where the policy bottlenecks are in energy systems, and to support impactful policy and regulatory reform. Through SETI, countries can also signal that they have common goals to deploy clean energy in an affordable and a reliable manner. And in this regard, I want to congratulate Nigerian Environment Minister Mohammed Abdullahi, who was on a previous panel, for his signing of the SETI letter of intent just last week. By signing the letter of intent, Nigeria signaled that it welcomes private sector investment in the clean energy infrastructure and is committed to implementing policy that will drive innovation. Through SETI, companies have indicated investment interests that could drive up to $100 billion in renewable energy infrastructure across 14 countries, including Australia, Brazil, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, Nigeria, Singapore, South Africa, the Republic of Korea, Thailand, the Philippines, and Vietnam. I saw the power of this demand signal as ambassador in Greece, where Microsoft's commitment to running their new €100 million data center complex on renewable energy is stimulating the rapid build-out of wind, solar, and grid infrastructure. And apropos of Roger Martella's presentation from GE, I was also glad in that context to partner with GE Wind and GE's gas turbine division to leverage this demand for clean energy sources and to make sure that American companies were at the front of the queue. I've also seen how the reliability of renewable energy is a serious consideration for American companies looking to make decisions on where to expand and to invest. So getting the regulatory environment right is crucial. In this regard, I also commend Google on its groundbreaking work to explore how systems can run 24/7 on renewable energy and how to lessen the burden on utilities by matching power demand. Improving energy efficiency in the rapidly growing air conditioning and refrigeration sector, apropos Honeywell, is another important element of the energy transition, as well as climate change mitigation. The work that Honeywell and Chemours are doing to merge HFC phase-out with cooling efficiency will have a profound effect on the new energy system. For example, in Southeast Asia, cooling accounts for 1/3 of peak demand in a region where energy requirements are projected to grow 60% by 2040. With a combination of targeted policies to accelerate energy transition and technology and capital from the American private sector, there's a fantastic potential to lower emissions, improve energy reliability, and expand economic opportunity. The United States intends to lead this next phase of energy developments, just as we have done for decades before through previous global energy transitions. And American energy, technology, and finance firms will be indispensable partners in this effort. I look forward to partnering with the Chamber in that regard, and thank everybody for the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Assistant Secretary, thank you very much on behalf of the Chamber, and thank you for making this event and the effort with the Chamber today one of your first ports of call, given your new role as Assistant Secretary. You covered a lot of ground and I think really set us up for success as a panel. and certainly highlighted the critical role that the private sector must play working closely with governments to achieve the goals that governments set out. And for this conversation focused on technology, as we said in our announcing the panel, we have industry leaders and we have 3 industry experts for this discussion. I want to introduce them and then we'll just dive right into this. Denise Dingham, President of Advanced Performance Materials at Chemours. Barry Glickman, Vice President and General Manager for Sustainable Technology Solutions at Honeywell. And special thanks to Honeywell for supporting today's event. And Mars Hanna, Head of Sustainability and Climate Policy at Google. Thank you all for being with us today. And to get us started, I want to throw a question to all of you. We'll start with Denise and work our way down. What are the important issues when you think about COP27 that are related to technology innovation, and what should negotiators prioritize as we look at COP27? Denise, turning to you first.
Thanks. Yeah, first, I guess I want to give a little introduction about Chemours. The Chemours company, we are a global chemical company, and we call ourselves a different kind of chemical company. We're really about solving problems, the most challenging problems in the world, and bringing good to the world, not just through our products, but also through the way we operate, through our responsible manufacturing, through our commitment to our communities, and really our commitment to STEM and STEM education. But maybe to get to your question, I think about it as far as the main theme is speed. And, thinking about innovation, really having a target and knowing what you're trying to solve, and having collaboration partners, having performance standards, knowing, for specific applications, what are the quality standards, what are the performance requirements, what are the safety requirements for different applications, and having global alignment. I think that's, one priority. The other I would say is that, we really need to focus on increasing the renewable infrastructure. And that also energy storage, long duration storage. So how do you quickly ramp up that infrastructure would be another aspect. And then the third aspect, which I think others have brought up today, is, when you're talking about innovation, it's new, and new is risky. And when you are looking at, especially now with a lot of the new policies, big projects, and so you're going to need big financing. And when you go to finance a project, people are saying, well, how do I need something that's going to last 20 years, but you only have 5 years of data, right? So how do you come up with mechanisms whereby you can kind of de-risk those investments and support, all parties involved to bring those innovations to reality?
Your thoughts?
So all of that was exceptionally well said. So let me just add a couple of slightly maybe tangential thoughts. So for COP27, the best thing that we can do is create the environment which enables innovation. And I think that requires 2 essential features. One is a clear and transparent market that prices carbon, whether that's in the form of a subsidy or a cost or a tax or whatever it is. Companies will innovate if we have clarity around what we are solving for. And the second essential feature to me of the right environment is providing for the overall ecosystem. So carbon capture without transportation and sequestration is not helpful. Hydrogen without transportation and blending is not helpful, or less helpful. So I think those 2 elements, create the environment, and then let companies innovate, and let the emitters adopt the innovations.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we'd agree at Google entirely on this concept of creating the environment for companies to really scale up and invest in decarbonization. We've focused on that at Google heavily through our procurement. We've started doing renewable energy purchasing for our data centers in 2010, and we've scaled that up. And as Assistant Secretary Payette said earlier, we're really focused now on how do we align that goal with the ultimate grid-wide goal of getting to 24/7 carbon-free energy, fully decarbonized grids. And for us, I think we need to focus much more on new technologies, opening the technology aperture beyond simply the traditional wind and solar PPAs that we've done before. Those will have an incredibly important role to play going forward. But how do we bring in technologies like solar and storage integrated together? How can we bring on advanced geothermal, advanced nuclear, demand response? What can we do to come up with new transactional methods, and what are the policy and market mechanisms that are going to enable that? We've done one of the most interesting projects we've done is an integrated wind, solar, and hydro deal in PJM that is only possible because we have a large integrated wholesale market across a broad region that allows us to blend all of these resources together into a single profile that's going to allow us to get closer to our goal of 24/7. So how can we focus on shining a light on some of those policy and market environments that are going to allow companies to innovate and get to things like 24/7 carbon-free energy?
Thank you all, and it's interesting to hear three very different companies, different sectors, different core parts of your business, but you all spoke to that enabling environment and the importance of that for, as you correctly pointed out, Denise, innovation is new, so you have to have that clear, so you do need to create that enabling environment, and to the extent we can de-risk, these investments and projects. Thank you all for that. Another round for all of you. I wanted to ask, and Barry, will come to you first on this one and then work our way. Where can technology, or where can your individual technology portfolios contribute to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, and where do you really see the opportunities for growth?
So let me, without too much Honeywell commercial, let me just spend 30 seconds on what's in the Honeywell portfolio. So we have technology offerings in sustainable fuel, in blue and green hydrogen, carbon capture, plastics recycling, and long duration battery storage. So I would say, to answer your question, in all of those areas. And I think with the IRA, that is a transformational piece of legislation for the United States, and really positions the U.S. to take a step change in the adoption of all of these technologies. And I think a point that almost every panel member has made previously, we need all of these technologies.
Maybe I'll focus a little bit on the role of digital technologies in helping enable this transition. We see this as something that has tremendous potential to help cities, businesses, governments really scale up their efforts. We're approaching this in a number of different ways. We see role for planetary scale geospatial information to really help companies monitor and enable action in their supply chain. Companies like Unilever are working with cloud technology to help understand where deforestation is occurring in their supply chain, and how they can take action to combat that. We're rolling out a product called the Environmental Insights Explorer that serves cities and provides them with data about the solar rooftop potential of buildings in their geography, transportation emissions, and other data sets that are going to really help cities take action by giving them baseline information. So we see a pretty important role for those kinds of geospatial technologies. And then the last thing I'll say is, and this was mentioned on the last panel as well, but there's a critical role for artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other very advanced compute to really help take action here. We've seen, we're working with a number of cities to roll out AI for optimizing traffic light timing in cities. And we've seen a reduction of 10 to 20% fuel consumption at a citywide level simply by optimizing the traffic flow in the city. So lots of opportunity there to really use advanced compute to take action.
Before I go to Denise, I just had to say, here in UNGA, I don't know if you've got it to the city here yet, but optimizing this traffic, yes. Some other further burdens for AI to learn. But Denise, please.
Sure. Hydrogen's a major focus for us. We've really invented the category of ion exchange membranes, which is really critical for water electrolysis, production of hydrogen, fuel cells, energy storage. We also, one of the things about our product line is that we're backward integrated. So we just don't make, polymers or membranes. We go back to really the basic chemicals, and we have that whole supply chain. So we have the ability to innovate, combining monomers, just really creating new molecules. So we have that potential within hydrogen, but we also are very involved with lithium batteries, and there's all kinds of applications. And as that technology is changing, there's a lot of innovation. And as that technology is changing, we're focused on how do you increase distance, how do you increase durability, and really working through fundamental chemistry.
Well, it's interesting to hear. I mean, all of your companies are doing a variety of things, but then there's also some obviously opportunities for integration across all the different technologies and innovation that you're pursuing. Very, very interesting. I wanted to come to each of you with a more direct individual question before we come back with perhaps a final question for all of you. And actually, I'm going to go to you, Mars, first to head it off. Google's been a champion for access for 24/7 clean electricity. Can you outline the challenges getting there and what you see Google Technologies doing to help on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different clear challenges. In a number of markets, it's simply retail access to purchase clean energy. Depending on where you are in the world, it can be very challenging to enter into new contracts to procure renewable energy at all, or any particular type of energy, let alone a temporarily matched clean energy supply with a large data center load. So having access or retail rates, regulated tariffs, however it is, to be able to enter into these kinds of contracts is something we need to really expand. We're particularly excited, I think, about the Clean Energy Demand Initiative to help think about what countries can do internationally to help create access at that retail level. The other side is the wholesale level. We've found consistently that the markets that have regional integrated electricity grids, that have competitive, transparent pricing, are the ones where there's the most cost competitive supply of resources. We heard earlier that clean energy is now in many jurisdictions one of the most cost-effective resources you can purchase. And if we need competitive marketplaces to really ensure that price pressure continues to drive these costs down and make these resources available. So creating large regional electricity grids we see as a really big opportunity.
Thank you for it. It seems like it gets back to that enabling environment that we keep referencing. Barry, coming to you, if you could speak to how does Honeywell view its role as both a large industrial company itself and as a solutions provider, on the other hand, to abate industries that you're also looking to decarbonize?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So, Honeywell is a $40 billion company with hundreds of facilities, and we are a significant global emitter. So we look at our role as modeling the type of behavior and showing by our actions what we believe is necessary to move the world onto the right path. So we've made clear commitments on scope 1 and 2 carbon neutrality, which we think is a minimum ticket to participate. But then we've backed it up with intermediate milestones, which we think is what's required to make sure the world is on a glide path to where it needs to be. We've made commitments on our scope 3 transparency. So scope 3 is, as I think everybody recognizes, will be multiples of scope 1 and 2. So once the world gets comfortable with commitments on scope 1 and 2, we think the debate will appropriately shift to scope 3, and Honeywell is at the front end of communicating how we are measuring and mitigating our scope 3. And then the third set of actions is taking the solutions that we're offering to the marketplace and bringing it into Honeywell facilities. So whether it's emissions monitoring, cloud-based solutions, hydrogen generation, carbon capture, we're implementing where it fits those solutions at Honeywell facilities. So we are leading by example.
Thank you. And it's always interesting to hear walking the talk and leading by example, as you said. Appreciate that insight. Denise, I wonder if you could share more about the investments in technologies that Chemours is making to support the transition to clean hydrogen and how it can support energy security as well.
So I would say that there's a broad range of investments and really kind of starts with R&D. So big investment in just research at a very fundamental level, but also investments in application. So how do we create products and how are we able to test those products just like our customers would test those products to shorten that innovation cycle. The other area where we're investing is we have to scale up capacity, and we don't want to be the bottleneck. We don't want to be the reason why the energy transition doesn't take place. And if you think about energy security, one of the things I talked about us being backward integrated, I think it sometimes gets lost, what it takes to enable some of these technologies. So you see a fuel cell, you see an electrolyzer, you see a battery, but chemistry is critical. And you can have all of those end-use production in a particular country or economy, but if you don't have all the other pieces to go along with it, you really don't have the security that you think you do. So I think that's one of the, and we are looking. We earlier in the summer we hinted at some of the evaluations we're doing on investments. We're going to be having some pretty exciting announcements coming up here in the coming months. But it's really about how we are investing along that whole supply chain to give not only the capacity that's needed for the market to take off, but for security of supply.
That's very interesting. I mean, obviously these innovations don't exist in a vacuum, and you need that entire ecosystem to be there and the infrastructure to support it. Very, very interesting. Well, I wanted to come perhaps to a final question for all of you for any final thoughts, and that is, and Mars will come to you with this to start us out. If you can help us understand what the aspects of climate and the clean energy debate that you feel are underappreciated, particularly when it obviously comes to the subject matter, which is technology and innovation.
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing that we have not focused on enough is simply the importance and value of partnerships and working collaboratively with other companies, with other governments to achieve our goals. We're very proud to be part of initiatives like the First Movers Coalition that are bringing together aggregated purchasers who want to offtake new commitments from new technology, and we're proud to be part of organizations like SETI that are helping set up aggregated regional demand to do more together as a set of companies in collaboration with government. So I think as we look to the future, no one company can solve this challenge alone. No one government can solve this challenge alone, and we need to continue to invest in building partnerships.
So. Oh, sorry, Mars. While you were talking, I was trying to narrow it down to one, but I can't. So I got two. So the first is storage. So the grid doesn't reach the maximum level of renewable power without us solving for a reliable form of low carbon energy storage, nor do I believe the hydrogen market get to its maturity without solving for how we effectively store and transport hydrogen. I think those are back to this concept of enabling technologies. That's essential. The second, and this is more in the policy domain, is, and I haven't come up with a better analogy, but a nutritional label for what is renewable, or what is green, or what is low carbon. We want to drive the world and the emitters and the technology providers to a certain level of behavior, having consistent global interpretation of how we measure things would be a critical enabler to make sure we are motivating the right behaviors.
Thoughts on underappreciation?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with both of the comments, and we were just talking about how we're going to collaborate on storage. So
sorry, I didn't mean to steal. I didn't mean to steal it.
But maybe I'll just go back to a theme that I've had here is that I think chemistry is underappreciated, and I think that it's phenomenal. Like the IRA, it's a gift, right? But it's not going to be possible if all the agencies within the government don't have a common vision. And in particular, I'm going to say the EPA, right? You cannot have new molecules if you actually can't permit a new molecule. You can't have a new facility if you can't permit a new facility. So, I see it in other countries where there's much better alignment around policy and regulations. And I think we really need to, it comes back to transparency and partnership and trust, but I think that's something that we really have to work on.
Good one.
Well, I think that's a lot of similarities in the themes, I think, and I really do want to thank all three of you for making some time to be with us today. It was very interesting to hear, to pick up on some of these key adjectives that I think you've all referenced. Having that enabling environment that creates kind of the playing field that is clear, that is transparent, that creates the definitions and the standards that have consensus and buy-in globally are very important, for these innovations and technologies to come to scale and to come to market and be deployed. So we thank all of you and all of your companies, Denise from Chemours, Barry from Honeywell, Mars from Google, for being with us today and sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to seeing the partnerships perhaps that'll come out of this and some of the ideas going forward. So thank you all today. Please, a round of applause for our panel.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to pass the microphone back to Marty.
Well, thank you, everybody. Just a quick closing remarks. We're back on time. To thank all the great speakers that we had today. I do just want to point out that, you heard from some real corporate leaders today. They're not alone. A lot of others that are out there doing the same thing, focused on the same. The business community is leaning in on this topic. So just know that. And of course, I want to thank those companies that were supporters of today's event and our broader effort going forward. So again, thank you for being here and look forward to working with you all going forward. Have a great day.